Welcome to the Muscatine Community School District Board of Education meeting for Monday, June 22nd. We are meeting again virtually in what is starting to feel a little bit like a norm now. And I think we all are starting to get a little more familiar and comfortable with our technology, and we're grateful that we're able to do that. So, Madam Secretary, could you take roll and determine a quorum, please?
You bet. Director Cooney?
Here.
DeBee?
Here.
Drawbaugh?
Here.
Finn?
Here.
McCarter? Toby McCarter? Director Morgan?
Here.
Sure.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Great, thank you very much. As we have done in our past meetings, we have been inviting a variety of guests to lead the Pledge of Allegiance for us. Tonight, you have another special treat. They have recorded themselves and shared. We have two sisters. We have Kate Bauer and Brooke Bauer that will be doing the pledge for us this evening. They are both our Girl Scouts, and they are Juliets, I believe is how you say that, which means they do not specifically belong to a specific troop, but they are able to, they spend their time volunteering throughout the community. I know the Lions Club is one of their favorite organizations that they do a lot of work with. So Kate and Brooke will lead us in the pledge tonight, or say the pledge for us.
Hi, my name is Kate Bauer. I'm going to be a freshman at Muscatine High School. I've been a Girl Scout for 10 years.
Hi, my name is Brooke Bauer, and I'm going to be a senior this year at Muscatine High School. I've been in Girl Scouts for 12 years. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law.
We appreciate Kate and Brooke leading that this evening, and we have more plans for more guests in the future. So, and let the record reflect, I believe, as our board secretary was getting our roll call out, I believe Toby McCarter has joined us. Is that correct, Lisa? Great. So Toby is on as well. I would welcome all of our visitors and our media representatives and anyone who is able and who's chosen to join us in this virtual world. Again, I know it's a little bit different than what we are used to, but in this new normal, we appreciate that you have joined. We have again left off on the agenda the Citizens Speak portion of the agenda. And we do this as a thoughtful omission, not to stifle the conversation. I would encourage anyone that would want to reach out to board members to please do that. You can find our email contact is available on the district website, and you're certainly able to reach out to board members at any time. We have not found a succinct way to do that virtually. That is our only reason for admission, not because we don't want to hear from those in the community. So again, please continue to feel free to reach out to your board members. Before we move on to our discussion and our action items, and probably some of the most important work that many of us will do as board members in some of the things that we have coming up, I would like to recognize that tonight, while Jerry Reeby joins us in his very fun Hawaiian shirt, it is his last meeting that he will be joining us as a board, or at least leading us. Jerry, you're always welcome to join us at any point in time. You can just call in for fun. My understanding that one of the things that you were the most excited about in driving you to retirement was really that you would get the, as I understand it to be called, the lifetime pass.
Yes.
To all MHS activities. So that will be on its way to you soon. And
That's great.
Please know that the door is always open. We would welcome you at any time to any activity, even if you forgot your pass. You could probably find someone who may vouch for you and for Jody. I think I can speak on behalf of the district and the board. We are so grateful for all that you have given to the community. we wish you the very best in your retirement. We look forward to hearing what you do next and what happens next. I appreciate the fact you're not by the pool tonight
Yeah.
during the meeting.
And I'm just so happy to get the pass because, you know, as we say in Muscatine, once a muskie, always a muskie. So, and I'm going to take that to heart. So thank you so much.
Well, we do certainly believe that once a muskie, always a muskie. So
Yeah.
Jerry, thank you, and thank you to Jody for all of her support as well.
Yes.
And we have lots of retirees again this year who we also thank so much for all of your years of service and dedication. And you too will be receiving your lifetime pass very soon. My understanding is as soon as our Lisa is back in the office, those will be printed and mailed out. So coming to a mailbox near you soon. Keep your eye out for those. So. And we welcome Clint Christopher, who's on with us tonight, and we appreciate Clint joining us. Clint will be is our new superintendent, and he and Jerry have done a lot of work together, which we're also all very grateful for because we are in unique times. So Clint, we will look forward to seeing you in person more. Hopefully we don't all have to sit virtually too much longer. So
yep,
welcome.
Thank you very much. We're excited about it. I want to say thanks to Jerry for all his support too. And it's been a pleasure working with him, and I just appreciate all the support in the transition. A lot of work being done to make sure we're ready to go. So thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it.
All right, well, let's get on to the work of the evening. So our first discussion or action item is the second reading on policy 401.8. This is payroll periods, and the new policy 900.15, and that's community use of school district facilities and equipment. Those have administrative regulations, R as in Robert 1, R2, R3, and Exhibit 1. Is there some discussion tonight to lead us in this conversation, or are we just looking at this as our second reading?
Unless there's questions, I think it's just looked at as second reading.
So each policy comes before the board 3 times before it is approved, with the intent that gives board members time to, 1, read through the policy and gather any feedback or questions that they may have. So I would say, as you have any questions or concerns about any of those 2 policies, and with the regulation and the exhibit piece, for right now, you could certainly address them both to get those to Lisa. She can forward those to the right place. The next item on our agenda is to take action on our employment recommendations. And there are a couple of different ones. I would ask, what are the wishes of the board on how you would like to handle those recommendations? You have a couple of hire recommendations, and there are a couple of resignations as well.
Madam President, I would like to move to approve the employment recommendations with the exception of the 2 late resignations for board discussions.
Okay.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the hire recommendations, pulling out the 2 resignations. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries. The next 2 items then would leave us with the 2 resignations. We have 2 resignations that you received. Both were after the cutoff time frame. One resignation is for a staff member that has a spouse that is in the National Guard. They have not only been called the National Guard, called the spouse up, but they will be, the National Guard is relocating to another state as well. The second recommendation, or the second resignation, Jerry, do you have any?
Yeah, I guess our recommendation that is the person that's being spouse is being restationed to Texas. I think absolutely should be released. this is a family that's serving our country and is not making a choice, but the military is making the choice for the family. The other, I would recommend a similar response as we did the others, that it would be approved upon a suitable replacement, with the superintendent having the capacity to issue that release upon hiring of the candidate.
What are the wishes of the board on these two resignations?
I would like to go with the recommendations of Dr. Reedy for the first one to be released, because it's they're moving to a different state and they will be serving our country. And the other resignation will be upon finding the appropriate individual who will take over that position. And at that point, the superintendent will be releasing that individual.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded to accept the resignation of the 6th grade staff member at Jefferson Elementary. That is a staff member that has a spouse that is being called up by the National Guard, as Jerry said, to serve our country. The second recommendation is a special education position at Jefferson. And the recommendation, or the motion, is to release upon suitable replacement. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries. Our next item on the agenda is to take action on the Muscatine Community School District's Return to Learn state plan. Jerry, I'm gonna look to you, and I think you're gonna pass possibly on to Mike.
Yes, the state plan, which a group of us got together and completed, is really a bare bones structure that the state is requiring. It really just provides points to make sure that we cover. And I've asked Mike to give an overview of that, and so I hand it off to the person up in my upper left quadrant there, Mike.
Thanks, Jerry. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to begin our Return to Learn presentation by providing you an overview and seek board approval for our state to Return to Learn plan. Then next, we will review with the board our Return to Learn stakeholder survey data. And then following that, our committee members will share out their recommendations. Certainly one of our goals of our Return to Learn plan is to meet the state requirements, but ultimately it is to develop a plan which best meets the needs of our students, parents, and staff, and enables everyone to have a seamless and successful transition to the start of the school year this fall. Our committee work has been based on the following assumptions: that our schools may need to look and operate significantly different this fall. We have encouraged committee members to embrace the opportunity to think outside the box and be open to change. Secondly, that our committee work will be ongoing throughout the summer and next school year. Once the committees make their initial recommendations tonight, additional work will be necessary this summer and next year to prepare, implement, fine-tune, and evaluate our recommendations. Our third assumption is that our committee work is complex and that our work will and needs to evolve based on feedback from the state as well as public health organizations. And then finally, we are striving with our committee work to be transparent, that we provide numerous opportunities for stakeholder feedback, and that we communicate out our plan at a very high level. So for discussion purposes and to help guide the board through our presentation this evening, we have provided each of you a hard copy of the following items: the Return to Learn agenda, a draft of the state Return to Learn plan, the district Return to Learn template, and you also have electronic access to all the board member questions presented so far. You can see on that document that many of your questions have either been answered or we've indicated that we don't currently have sufficient amount of information to be able to answer the questions. But I know I'm speaking for the committee when I say we have greatly appreciated your feedback and your willingness to share your insights and questions with us. I will now turn it over to Becky, who will kind of go over the draft of the the state Return to Learn plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So I would like to provide a brief overview of the state's guidance in the Return to Learn submission process. So it is due July 1st, and it is submitted by the superintendent. Once it is submitted, it will be posted on our website, so it will be available publicly. There are 3 sections in the Return to Learn plan that must be completed and approved before submission occurs. Section 1 revolves around our required continuous learning. And these are set up in the way of assurances. So these questions are answered in a yes/no type format. And there are 3 types of continuous learning. There's the required continuous learning plan, which all districts and non-public schools must have. There is the hybrid learning, which is a combination of face-to-face learning and virtual distant learning, and then on-site learning. And the state is requiring districts to plan for at least one of those, but we are recommending a plan for both. So we will have a required plan for the continuous learning, the hybrid learning, and the on-site learning as well. Section 2 revolves around the specific Return to Learn plan questions. And these are set up in a multiple choice type format. So these questions are all around the following topics: the required continuous learning plan, leadership and infrastructure, health and safety, the Iowa academic standards amongst equity, and social emotional behavior support around equity, special education, and then data. And the data is embedded in all of the areas throughout the document. And then the last section, section 3, revolves around the school calendar. So this section is set up in a multiple choice format with specifics based solely on the school calendar, which include what is the start date and will there be any additional days added on. So as Mike alluded to, the board has been provided a draft of the state's Return to Learn plan, which reads in a checklist type format. We feel very confident that we've answered and addressed all of the questions that the state required. And you will also hear shortly our district's Return to Learn plan, which goes into much greater detail and goes way beyond what was required by the state's Return to Learn plan. So at this time, if the board has any questions, I will turn it back to President Draba.
Becky, is that August 23rd date? That's a Sunday. Is that that's correct? Is that we don't start on a
The first day of school, I believe, is Monday, August 24th.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Becky or Scott, just for my own information, assurance number 9, what is a 50, what is 508 compliant for a web system? It doesn't really matter, I guess. I just don't know what 508 compliant or being compliant with 508 web content accessibility guidelines are.
Oh, you're muted.
I think that primarily has to do with ADA compliance, that you don't have too many steps to get somewhere, to put it pretty simply. So it is one of those things that we've been working on, trying to get a handle on, but that's what that refers to, is ADA compliance with the website.
Okay, thank you. And in the second section, there's a couple of it alludes to a couple of surveys that have been done, and that the result, as a board, are we gonna be able to see some of those results?
Yes, and actually, the next item would be for Gwen to share some of that survey data with you.
Thanks, Becky.
You're welcome.
Can I add that the survey results from the district surveys anyway are on the Return to Learn Google site? And I thought I sent those to the board, but I did, right? Yes, Karen,
Yeah.
you're shaking your head. So Mark, maybe, do I need to resend them to you?
No, I guess I must have missed whatever the mitigation inventory survey was, and the our social emotional ones were just some of the questions. So I'll find them, or I missed them. I don't know.
And I think, if I remember right, I don't have the plan in front of me, the state plan, but those are also the ones that we're going to resurvey, which I'll talk about later. Our constituents after school starts, to see how everybody is doing.
Well, Becky, I'm sorry. I do have a question on this. Almost, not the last page, the page before that, under section 2, return to learn equity, and equity number 4. That's my question about, I see that you check mark 2 of the 3, but basically, if I take the first one, providing technology, for example, laptops and iPad. But if we're doing this and the issue of internet access is not there, how providing that machine gonna help the students who have that laptop or the iPad? And this is a question that I'm asking just for verification.
And we had quite a bit of conversation about that. And the reason we didn't check it is we do not have the capacity to provide internet access. And so for us to say we were going to do that, even if you put hubs on buses, you have people in the country, you have people in apartments, that doesn't necessarily work very well. So we wanted to make sure we weren't promising something that we didn't have the capacity to do. And right now we don't have the capacity to make sure every student has access to the internet. I think the state we're looking at that and trying to figure out how they could make Iowa a Wi-Fi state, but it would be, I think, beyond our means to be able to assure every student had internet access.
Having said that, Jerry, are we looking at working with, like, say, Power and Water and any other potential partners in which to be able to help with that? Because I know we worked briefly with them with the Wi-Fi, access in several areas.
Yeah, and I think they will probably continue some of those programs. Probably the most difficult ones are some of the folks out in the country don't have access to MPW. And so it is more expensive to have the Wi-Fi. You're limited on the amount of I don't want to say bandwidth's not the right term, but you are limited by time that you have. So that is a huge issue, and I think it's one of the myths that is going around the state and the nation that distance learning is going to be the salvation of education if we run into more pandemic problems. But the reality is you're going to have a lot of kids with access problems. You have a lot of kids with no supervision problems. Can you imagine anywhere kindergarten through 2nd grade, even if they have access and they have a unit, you need an adult supervisor or an adult there to guide them. Otherwise, they're not going to stay focused for 6 hours sitting on a computer, or 3 hours, or maybe 20 minutes. So there's a lot of things that need to be worked out on this, and it is a tool, but nobody should be fooled into thinking it's going to replace kids in the classroom. And yeah, the other, and I do tip my hat to MPW. I think they had that $10 package for folks. For some folks, they don't have the $10. So it's it will be a continuing problem with access, and that's why, John, we didn't click that button, because we didn't want to try and say we were doing something that we wouldn't be able to do.
Thank you.
So
I'd also like to share with the board that once we submit this plan, if at any time we want to go back and make changes and check off something or uncheck something, we have total forgiveness in doing that. So just rest assured, any edits can take place, and it is a fluid document.
Thank you.
So I think before us then, as a board, what we need to do is this piece, then we take action on this particular piece. And again, I would like to reiterate what Becky said. If we need to make some changes to this, we have the ability to do that with the state. We being you, Becky, as you shake your head, yes, not as opposed to us. The other piece that I would like to remind both just as a board and remind our public is we are also waiting for the governor to release the document on July 1st that says what are our guidelines on how we're going to reopen our schools. And that may or may not contain some information that gives us an opportunity to rethink some of the decisions that we have made. And I use the word opportunity sort of loosely. So there are still a lot of unknowns and direction that we need and that we will all be waiting with bated breath for. So what are the wishes of the board on this return to learn document that has been presented?
I'll make the motion to approve the return to learn 2020 to 2021 plan to the state.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the MCSD return to learn state plan. And again, I would remind everyone, this is when I heard there was a state plan, this is not what I envisioned. And it's pretty, I hate to say it's pretty simple. It's check some boxes with thorough understanding of what we're checking, but this is not the detail. So we're going to talk about the detail next. So for our community members, if this is something that you look at and are slightly surprised by what it looks like, it is what it is. Is there any other discussion on the document? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And opposed? And the motion carries. How, just out of curiosity, what was the official date we started working on this document? Would anybody like to venture to guess how many days and hours what has been spent on this?
Oh, it was in March, or the end of March. Time has somewhat become a little fluid for me. I'm not sure, Mike or Becky, if you guys remember when we
I do. I remember you sent an email during spring break. So that would have been the week of what? March 15th-ish?
Yeah.
About heads up, this could be coming around, and you were exactly right.
So almost 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody want to guess the number of hours besides a lot? A lot.
A lot.
So we appreciate that. This is just, again, I've said this several times, this is probably some of the most difficult and impactful work that we will do. And I say we, meaning you all that have done and put before us. So.
And Tammy, and Mike or Becky, maybe you, just roughly how many people worked on this project?
Roughly on the committees, you had 32 main committee members on it. But, with all the vetting and everything, the feedback, we just had a lot of people that were willing to give us some great feedback on it too. So.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that this was tried to be as inclusive and get as many different ideas involved as possible, and still maintain a workable number. And I think the committee chairs did a great job with this. All 4 of them.
Agree.
5. I'm sorry. That did now. Somebody was going, well, what about which one of us didn't?
All right, well, that takes us then, I think, really to the meat of where a lot of questions will be, and that is to review the return to learn plan, which has, I think, a lot more information that both our community and board members are going to ask. So, Becky,
Yep.
Mike, Jerry, who gets to take the lead?
It would be me.
There we
So
go.
thanks, Tammy. So at this time, I want to introduce to you all Gwen Sheridan. So on May 27th, a stakeholder survey was sent to parents, students, and teachers regarding the online learning modules that took place during the COVID closure this spring, as well as their thoughts on returning to school this fall. So we had an incredible response to the survey from our Muskie constituents, and Gwen Sheridan, who is our Director of Information Management, will now provide you an overview of the results and answer any questions that you may have about this survey. So Gwen?
Hi, everyone. Just like Becky said, we sent out 3 surveys to the district stakeholders. We had 1,055 parent-student surveys. 777 of those were parents, and 278 were student responses. We had 268 teacher responses, 146 of which were elementary teachers, 44 were middle school teachers, and 75 were high school teachers. We also had 3 responses where they were either at the elementary and high school or elementary and middle school. We also did a non-teaching staff survey, which received 232 responses. So as she stated, we had different sections of the survey. One is the COVID concerns and comforts and things that when they come to school next year, what would make them comfortable. For COVID concerns, 2/3 of parents and students said that they either disagreed or had no opinion with students or staff wearing masks. That did not increase their comfort levels. Teachers reported that they were their major concern was being exposed to COVID-19. Up there with the major concern being that they were being exposed to COVID-19, they were concerned that the way they teach is going to be changing significantly. The top concerns of parents and students is that gathering spaces, workspaces, and classrooms won't be properly disinfected, that public health regulations won't be followed, and the possibility of contracting COVID-19. Almost 40% of students that were surveyed and responded were concerned about readjusting to the classroom and school life. 50% of non-teaching staff are concerned about being exposed to COVID-19. Comforts for these concerns, all stakeholders, parents, teachers, non-teaching staff, and students had a common set of comforts that followed the same trend, the most prominent being that cleaning and sanitizing supplies were readily available. The next was that the workspaces, common areas, and classroom were being cleaned and sanitized daily, that public health regulations were being followed, and that symptom checks are required before entering the workplace or the classroom or school. You guys have any questions in regards to COVID concerns, comforts, anything in that aspect that I covered? All right. Sorry, I'll give you guys just a few seconds. I know it takes time to unmute and all of that. All right, well, I'll move on to the continuous learning questions. So when asked the question, how do you feel the continuous learning model went for you and your students? On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not very well and 5 being very pleased, 48% of teachers responded at a 1 or a 2, and 52 stated a 3 or above. 60% of teachers reported connecting with 0 to 24% of their students each week. 62% of all teachers stated that they agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, "I had the resources I needed at home to be successful with remote learning." And 66% of teachers stated that they agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that they had received the support they needed to be successful with remote learning. Parents were also surveyed about continuous learning. 74% of the parents and 64% of the students stated that they participated in online learning. And for those who did not participate, they said that the lessons being required was the biggest reason they did not. And the next most prominent answer was that the stress due to COVID was the reason that they did not participate. Parents and students were asked to rate the ease of finding lessons, the length of lessons, the amount of time to complete the lessons, and teacher communication. The majority of these were rated as good, very good, or excellent. However, 14% of parents rated the length of lessons as poor, and students and parents rated the teacher-staff communication as poor at 15% and 14% respectively. Of parents who answered the survey, 67% stated that yes, they will be sending their students to school in the fall. In contrast, 24.6% said that they were uncertain, and 2.4% stated no, they will not be sending their students to school in the fall. Of the parents who said that they were uncertain or know that they were not sending their students to school in the fall, they stated the educational delivery options that they would most support is a hybrid learning model that allowed students to participate in both in-person and remote online learning. 50% of parents who said no or uncertain agreed with that. 32% stated that they would support an all learning is conducted remotely via online learning. 5.2% stated that they plan to homeschool, which is 11 respondents, and 1.9 stated that they plan to enroll their children in an online school, and 1.9 equates to 4 students. And so this was just meant to be a general overview of the questions. On the website there are, it's broken down deeper for, if you're questioning, elementary or different school perspectives. Are there any questions about the survey that we sent out?
Gwen, do you have you said like the 15% of the parents said that the communication with the staff was poor?
Yes.
So was there any elaboration on that, or?
No, we didn't have a section for comments, unfortunately.
Okay. I was just wondering if they, I know I looked at some of the lessons. I didn't know if they wanted their specific teacher to give the lesson or what, instead of having a rotating basis or something like that.
So we did ask some open-ended questions on how it could generally be improved, what they would like to see incorporated, and we have that narrative data presented on the website as well. So there's a lot of, I know that the different subcommittees are looking at that narrative for improvements, but specifically attached to that question, we didn't have a narrative question.
All right, thank you.
Gwen, I had a question. It says that 74%, or parents said that 74% of the kids participated. I know that was a yes or no question, so it could have been one video versus the whole curriculum.
Correct.
But in some of the narrative, the teachers stated like only 20% of their students participated and things like that. Do we actually have the numbers of how many students participated in like 1 or 5 or more, or the whole curriculum? Like, do we have those from the website itself? Like,
so I have data for the first 3 weeks based on a very specific set of standards and models. And again, that will take a lot of time to get into. I can tell you that from week 1 to week 3, it was trending downward. From week 1 to week 3, it about cut in half. I'm happy to answer those questions at another time. I just don't have that data right in front of me, but I do have an analysis for the first 3 weeks that can be, the data can be fitted to that model for weeks 3 to 6, 3 to 7, if we find it significant.
Yeah, I was just wondering how to interpret how many students actually you participated in a significant way.
Yeah, I think the terms for significance would have to be defined first. And so that's something, that, K1 would find different from 2.3 to 2.4. So again, I have the way I did K through, I think 5 or K6 is based on if they clicked into that lesson, that ID, that teacher video, if they viewed that, then it counted versus against the enrollment. So it's a range model, but again, it is only week 1 through 3. So,
is it safe to say that roughly 20% of the people replied back to the survey itself? Because it wasn't.
Really,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. It's just hard for me to estimate that based on. So parents could answer the survey twice for if they had 2 students, 3 times if they had 3 students, because again, your experience for your elementary student might be different for your high school. So for me to make an estimate, it would be unfair because we're going to see more people, the same responses duplicated, and we only had it as an online format. So it's just harder to estimate what percentage did or did not do it since we don't have a unique identifier.
Right, and the only reason I was asking, because going back to what Aaron had mentioned, 74% said they participated, but that was 74% of the people that answered the survey. So exactly. If 20% of the people answered the survey, it's 74% of 20%. So we actually there are a whole lot of people that didn't reply, so we have no idea of who was getting anything. So, and I'm just basing it off of, if I remember the numbers, the first time was like 1,000 students out of, when I estimate we have about 5,000 students, so 20%. Probably pretty much the same with the staff, that it was about 20% if I quick math, but it's not that important. I just think it's important for us to remember that these numbers that we're seeing are a small percentage of those that replied, because we have a bigger group that didn't reply didn't have a voice. Not that they weren't offered a voice, but they chose not to reply or didn't know that they needed to reply.
Yeah, exactly. I have a full-length explanation and analysis report that's on the website that talks about the different sampling biases and different items that need to be taken in perspective with each question. And the subcommittees, when they're making those decisions, are aware of those. And that is also provided.
Thank you, Gwen.
No problem. Are there any other questions or anything I can clarify for you guys? All right, well, I appreciate your time. I'm going to return it back to Becky.
Yes, thanks, Gwen. So I am going to turn it right around, and I'd like to introduce our chairs, Stephanie Zillig and Stacy Orr. They were chairs for our curriculum and assessment group. So Stephanie and Stacy.
Actually, I'm going to take this part. Stephanie's got the closing here. So it's my pleasure to introduce the District Return to Learn Plan for review. The District Return to Learn Plan has been an extremely collaborative effort that we've talked about multiple times here. And we should feel very proud of all the work that has been done. The plan is a recommendation that's been made by our committee members. And this has been after weeks of work that included time researching available materials, applying guidelines provided by the Department of Education and CDC, developing drafts for review, and then reflecting on and making adjustments based on feedback, as the drafts were both internally and externally vetted. Both the committee membership and vetting groups, you can find the full member list of those that participated on the Return to Learn website if you want to see all the names. Stephanie Zillig and I were asked to be co-chairs of the curriculum and assessment group in order to provide guidance for that all levels at K-12. Becky Witchers was the chair of the Special Populations Committee, and Mike McGrory, the chair of the Operations Committee. We have subcommittee chairs from each problem statement tonight that will be providing a summary of the recommendation to the board. To start with, for curriculum and assessment, we will have Leslie Bennett, Joelle McConaughey, Gretchen Price, and Terry Hoganson. As they read through their recommendation, just want to make sure you keep in mind that this is and will continue to be a working document. As we get closer to the start of the school year and more information is provided or learned, we will continue to adjust this plan in order to provide the best learning experience for our students in the safest environment possible for all stakeholders. So at this time, we will get started with, I believe, Leslie is up first with our first problem statement.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Leslie Bennett. I'm the principal at Grant Elementary, and I am the spokesperson tonight for our subcommittee. Our committee worked on using incoming assessments to be used to gauge current individual student gaps. And obviously, assessment looks very different at kindergarten than it does in high school. So we had a lot of discussion about what this looks like K-12 and ended up making a couple different recommendations. So as an overview, at kindergarten through 8th grade, we are recommending that we continue using our fast reading math assessments as well as ACT Aspire interim tests. And those will be administered as normal in grades K through 8 to determine gaps in learning. And then furthermore, for primary students, we already have diagnostic assessments in place, such as 95% phonics screeners and sight word inventories that will be used to determine further gaps as needed. Aspire and FAST will allow teachers to use this data to identify priority standards that are deficient and work in teams to identify students who need additional support when those standards cycle or reappear in the current curriculum. And if necessary, exploratories will create formative pre-assessments based on their own content standards and prerequisite knowledge needs. At the high school level or secondary level, grades 9 through 12, each department or PLC team, teacher team, will identify priority standards from the 2020 fourth quarter that need to be spiraled into the 2020-2021 curriculum. So each department or teacher team, so example, 9th grade English, would collaboratively create pre-assessments that measure skills critical to student success in that particular class. So that's a very general overview of our assessment plan for students coming in and addressing their needs and how we need to fill in the gaps going forward.
So Leslie, do you, or anyone really, so that with the FAST and all of your normal assessments, what's kind of the timeline in general for our public and for everybody else of when that will be completed?
Anyone can chime in, but I can speak for the elementary level. We typically have most of those K through 8 FAST assessments done within the first couple of weeks of school. So typically, I think we would follow that timeline unless the state decides to push that up. We would be administering the interim tests a little earlier than normal this fall, so we could use that standard-based information to help fill in gaps. So I would say probably within the first month, we would have some useful reports and data to guide us in instruction.
Okay. In my mind, the most important thing we need to do is figure out where to start, because we know that with our PLC work, tier 1 is where everything's at. And I don't know how we can do all of our tier 1 teaching if we don't know where everybody's at. So anything that we can do to get good information about where all the kids are at to start, so we can start with our tier 1 before we start working on interventions, that's kind of the way I would lean. So I'll try to be quiet the rest of the night. I won't work, but I'll try.
Mike, let me piggyback on that a little bit, because my question then becomes, how are these tests done? Or is it something that's done online or could be? So then is that assessment something that could be done actually before that August 24th date? You know what I'm saying? So that we get started at a sooner pace.
I will try my best to answer that question, but again, if anyone wants to chime in, feel free. I don't know if I know all the answers to that, Karen, quite yet, because currently most of our FAST assessments and our ACT Aspires are taken online. So we may be able, that could be a possibility that maybe they could be pushed out early. I really don't know yet. Some of them are like the Math Fast are personal interviews with students, inventories, but I'm sure there are ways we could administer those online, and we can adapt them as needed.
Well, the biggest issue with doing things online is the validity of them. You don't know exactly how, who's helping or what the circumstance is when they're being completed and that type of thing. So that might be a little bit of an issue.
And I don't mean to interrupt here much, but I think some of these questions may be answered a little bit as we go through the rest of the curriculum and assessment presentation, only because even in talking about the next group who's going to maybe talk about the modification of curriculum, they're going to talk about maybe a little bit more how we may fill in those, the what's missing fourth quarter. So we do have an opportunity for you guys all to ask questions at the end of each major section. So if we wait till the end of the curriculum and assessment, that may give us a little bit more guidance, and you might find some of your answers answered along the way. Hopefully it's not too long or too much information for you, because so maybe jot down your questions. But again, I was thinking as some of those questions are answered, that as I've read through the stuff, or just know what the groups have been working on, that we might have some answers as we finish our presentation here. So that would leave Joelle next.
Okay, thanks. So I'm Joelle McConaughey, and I am the principal at McKinley. Our problem statement was the modification of curriculum to blend the missing fourth quarter of the 2019-20 school year with the 2021 school year. And our committee had a group of teachers from elementary, junior high, and high school. So first, we discussed that we would start by identifying grade level or department priority standards that were not taught during the fourth quarter. The focus would be on how we can support the needs of students in grade level material. We would use a real-time approach for teaching those standards. We would identify when those standards need to be taught according to the scope and sequence of each grade level and department. Then we would use the assessments that Leslie just spoke about that were recommended by the assessment team to diagnose the student's current level of understanding of those standards. Then teachers would provide instruction on those prerequisite skills based on those assessment results. Instruction would occur in Tier 1, which is the core time of instruction. And then we would also make sure that we had time allotted for Tier 2 and Tier 3 time throughout the day. We would provide professional development and support for these instructional strategies to our teachers, and we would provide curriculum resources that teachers may need. We would then continue to monitor the progress of those students throughout the year, and I think the next group is going to talk a little bit about how we would address that area.
Is that me? This is Gretchen. Is that me? Am I next?
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, Joelle, sorry. I had one quick question.
Sorry.
Before we go. So this is catching up. What about getting the rest of a full year of curriculum in along with the catch up? How is that being planned for?
Right. So we've been reading a lot of different articles, and on the Iowa Department of Ed, we've been watching a lot of webinars. We actually even looked at some articles from school districts that experienced Katrina and some of their lessons that they learned when school was shut down for them. So the recommendation for the real-time approach, meaning initially, I think a lot of us thought, we would come in and maybe start with those fourth quarter standards that kids missed and then start with curriculum. And the recommendation really is that using a real-time approach. So looking, a lot of the standards scaffold for students. And so we would look at whatever that standard was in that grade level, and then look back at maybe what they missed, maybe that, and then the work would really be then around the instruction of how to scaffold that learning while still, teaching at grade level. Because I think one of the lessons that they learned in Katrina was that they went back and tried to tier approach teach, meaning, they went back and tried to teach from remediation versus grade level. And they learned that they never got to the grade level curriculum. It really put kids further behind. And so that whole purpose then of doing that real-time teaching is going to be, how do we support that scaffold while still keeping them at grade level? And that's the work that we'll have to do in with PLCs and coaches and administrators. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Sure. It sounds like you in parallel, at grade level, but in parallel with the subject matter.
Yes. And they call that real-time approach. That's kind of the wording that they use, is in real time. So.
Real time means double time? No.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, I would like to just add one thing here. I know that, Stacy, you mentioned that, but I don't want to miss the point here. I do agree with you, Joelle, with your assessment and everybody else. But my concern will be the assessment. When Leslie mentioned, and I was planning to ask this question before, and I decided to wait a little bit. The assessment, when it happens the first couple of weeks, and knowing the situation of the last quarter of this year, and add on top of that the almost 3 months summer, I will have an issue with the assessment the first 2 weeks, because we know for sure that students will not be at their potential level when we assess them after almost 6 months of not really attending classroom and so on. So I think this is the only point that I would like to throw back at you guys to consider when it comes to the assessing the students' work. When we do that, is it necessary has to be the first 2 weeks, or can we delay that a little bit up until we bring them up and then assess them? So thank you.
And John, I will just speak really quickly to that. I think the intent is not to come in and assess every single standard that students have missed in fourth quarter, because we have to think about the social emotional impact of students coming back and all of those things. I think what the assessment team is recommending is that we would do those traditional fall assessments that we do when kids return. And then the other assessments that we may use from Aspire or the teacher developed assessments around students would be throughout the school year when those standards come up.
Thank you.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Jody, Joelle, you mentioned about making sure that the teachers had the correct ability to do some of this. How's that supposed to work with how much time that they normally get before school starts and get everything done? And then now we're adding this information onto how they're supposed to do it, and that might be something that you're going to be talking about later. So I just throw that out there.
I can address that. I think that all of our teachers work in PLCs in our schools, so they're already used to working with their teams or their departments. And so the work that we'll do, a lot of that will continue to happen in their PLCs, but we'll just want to make sure that we provide the support that they might need, because we understand that there's going to be some additional work around scaffolding or enriching, right, in some of those areas. So we'll be cognizant of the fact that we need to provide that support for them in the time. Yeah.
Okay, I'm Gretchen, and our committee worked on developing a model for remediation and enrichment, which I guess that was a good segue. As with many other committees tonight, I would imagine, obviously our work really overlaps quite a bit with others, and mostly with the curriculum and the assessment groups. So our committee membership included teacher representatives from preschool through 12th grade. And as we started to discuss our problem statement, it quickly became apparent that the needs of students, staff, and scheduling differences were going to be barriers for developing an entirely district-wide model. So therefore, in order to best meet the needs of our students across the district, we developed a set of guidelines for the elementaries, the junior high, and the high school to follow, understanding that each level will address these guidelines differently per their specific needs for them, for their buildings and their students. We're encouraging buildings to move with a sense of urgency when we return in the fall. In order to support identification of students, we hope to jumpstart this process by asking teachers, building leadership teams, or student support teams to complete the enrichment and remediation template, which was attached in our Return to Learn plan, as soon as possible. We didn't put a specific date on that. It can be flexible, but our hope is to get that done as soon as possible before the beginning of the school year. This template has been modified from an at-risk template developed by a team of teachers, staff, and administrators roughly 2 years ago. The purpose here of using this template is twofold. First, we know the beginning of the year is going to be much different than it has been in the past, and whatever work we can accomplish before students show up will be good for everyone. And second, as students move from one teacher to the next or one building to the next, they will be interacting with teachers and staff that may not have a complete understanding of their academic and social emotional needs. Typically, you have a honeymoon period, and this data is gathered in August with intensive remediation and enrichment typically starting in late September. And our hope is that by gathering this information now, that we can sort of fast forward services and put those in place sooner than maybe late September. We're encouraging each building to take a wraparound or a layered approach to remediation and enrichment. In order to do this effectively, we are encouraging buildings to identify a small team of teachers to develop, guide, and monitor remediation and enrichment. There is quite a bit of dialogue in the educational community right now that highlights the expanding disparities in learning and development as a result of this crisis. And we feel that it is important and necessary to support our students' success, recognizing that this perhaps will be more difficult than it has been in the past. And having a team dedicated to this work will be a necessary component of addressing these challenges. Our plan draws on current research of best practices for supporting academically vulnerable and at-risk students. We're hoping that these teams will be tasked with identifying students who are 2 to 3 or more years discrepant from their peers, and then grouping these students according to their needs, and then matching them with appropriate highly qualified teachers and the correct curriculum that addresses their needs. The idea here is to organize students into small supportive peer groups based on similar academic and social emotional needs. This model follows best practices that take a mentorship approach to remediation, recognizing that relationships and social emotional support are a necessary component of academic remediation. We are encouraging these teams to develop a schedule that ensures these students receive what is known as core plus more. This means that students receive support above and beyond core instruction, which would include a typical MTSS cycle, so your tier 1, tier 2. So we're talking about more in addition to that. Most likely, this will require some sort of schedule modification, both for students and for teachers and staff involved. Each building team would then be charged with developing a schedule that addresses needs, and then present this to the building leadership team or administrative team, whatever the channels would be in that building. Finally, we hope that this team would then be charged to closely monitor the progress of these students, layering more supports as they become necessary. And while I've mostly spoken with this in a remediation lens, the same would apply for enrichment. So it just was quicker just to say one thing, but the same process would apply for enrichment as well. That's our plan.
Gretchen, a quick question on that core and more. Excellent information, by the way. Is that something that we normally do with that, or is that something we're adding on for the kids to be able to have that kind of help?
An MTSS model in tier 3, or really in general, should include a plus more. It's always a challenge in any building to include that plus more. So we're really putting the onus on this team to develop a schedule that ensures this, because we're assuming, we don't know, again, the assessments aren't in, that the disparity is going to be greater than it has been in the past. So we really want to make sure that we're addressing that. So gathering information, kind of getting to know who was behind when they left, we can make assumptions about how many students are probably going to be behind or need to be enriched. The same model. So we want to have that thinking in place so that we can develop that schedule, because we're assuming there will need to be some sort of schedule.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think Terry is the last one for this group.
All right, our problem statement dealt with a model of online learning as required due to the event of another school disruption. One of the key things that we focused on initially was what will be the management system that we want to use consistently throughout the whole system, pre-K or K through high school. And so we decided that Google Classroom would be our recommendation. Most staff have had experience, especially at the secondary level with this, and it was a requirement of all staff to have some of the modules in that covered during this time when they haven't been in general instruction. Also, we know that there has to be professional development centered around that, because not every level has had exposure to the Google Classroom. So the recommendation would be for us to plan out professional development for parents, students, and staff, so on how to access and understand and interpret the ability to use that platform, so that there is, there's cohesiveness in that model. Additionally, the staff came up with the recommendation is for other areas of professional development to coincide with this, dealing with trauma-informed instruction, equity, and inclusion. Because there was a feeling that a number of our students are going through or have experienced a lot since they were released from general instruction in March, and will need time to regroup and understand, and we need to be in a readiness stage for making sure that we can meet those needs and bring them from wherever they're at and the experiences they have. We also felt that a flipped classroom model would be beneficial, where we are looking at training staff on how to work with students on presenting information, so that they would be having that more at home, have the videos, lectures, and things accessible to them, and then have the clarifications and reinforcement done more at the school level to provide more of an equal base or equity in that process. One of the other recommendations is that we would have staggered schedules that would exist. Part of the belief of the group as we were looking at things is that if we perceive a 45-minute lesson per content area per every day, that students will lose interest, they will not stay engaged, and that that especially for our primary level students and even for our seniors, they probably having a little less is more, high impact, but having lessons that are digestible so that they can do this and not overwhelm them, and would still maintain their interest level. If the hybrid model creates a little bit of dilemmas for us, dealing with how would we, what are the numbers we would look at? How would we make sure that the number of students that we're having in school and out of school, how do we make sure that they're A equals B instructionally? We can't say that students that attend school have a better advantage of learning than those that would just be in a continuous remote learning model. So we want to make sure that we have to really vet through that process to make sure that all instruction and curriculum is available to all students in a fair way, whichever manner that they're getting their educational experience. So I guess the last part of that is just that they need to coexist if we're going to be doing any sort of a blended or hybrid model with a continuous learning model. Then we need to make sure that both experiences provide them with the same opportunities to learn the curriculum that we feel is essential for them to move on. So those would be the recommendations out of our group.
Terry, I had one question on the online piece. This past fourth quarter, it was voluntary. It seemed like a light curriculum. It was like one subject once a week type of thing. Going forward, is the committee looking at how it would work online to deliver a full curriculum, a full week's worth of classes? You mentioned not having 45 minutes every day, 6 hours in a row or whatever, but is the plan to just continue that continuous light learning and keeping kids engaged, or are you looking at literally delivering a full year's worth of curriculum online? Because those seem different to me.
I think that's an excellent point, Aaron. One of the things that we talked about is we have the responsibility of not providing education light, is actually the term we were using also, is that it's our students need to be ready for the next level of learning. Our students leaving our school system need to be ready for the college experience. We cannot give them less of an education than they deserve. So we need to find ways to manage that process. The model that we had at the end of this school year was so voluntary that a number of students just said, well, if it doesn't bear any weight, they opted out of that for other endeavors. And we are hoping that part of the expectations of this not being voluntary anymore, but expected, will help in that process.
So not only required, but also more enriched curriculum, a full full set of curriculum for the year or whatever time period that might be that they're online.
Absolutely.
Aaron, and to jump into that. Go ahead, Stacy.
I was just saying, I think regardless of whatever format we are providing, it goes back to that we want to ensure that we provide our students with that guaranteed and viable curriculum. And that's a process that we're continuing to look at, is that what is essential that all students will get. And then from there, how do we make sure we bring up our kids that are struggling to that point? But also then we're talking about another tier here, and making sure we're enriching kids. So I think whatever format we're going to look at, that's going to be our goal, and to ensure that all students get that essential learning.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It just seems like a very large leap from where we just were to getting there and being able to deliver a full year's worth of curriculum online. That seems like significant amount of work and effort that doesn't seem like it could happen in the next 2 months or whatever that might be. I mean, it seems like a lot more than where we just came from. So that's really the nature of it.
For sure. Yeah.
Can we do that? Is that really feasible? And will it be a full year curriculum that we can deliver online for this upcoming 2021 school year, basically?
Aaron, to jump in on that though, I think that these people have been planning for this since March. They kind of knew that this was going to happen. And what we faced with state, and anybody on the committee could jump in because my understanding of it might be different than what everybody else's is. But what the state said to start with was, if you can't provide all of this and get all of the stuff to make sure that it's viable, that you need to make it a voluntary program. And once we decided to make it a voluntary program, we really had no say on who could do what. But now, if we're going to give credit, if we're going to say people are prepared, we have to have something that is viable. And I don't know if Stacy was reading my notes or not, but what I was going to jump in and say, really the key is to identify what's essential, what's a priority standard. How do we define that? Because we have to guarantee that every single kid that's going to live on their own has those essential learnings or meets those priority standards. And I think that pares it down a little bit, because the state standards, if you taught one every single day, you'd still leave out 90. That's just not going to be feasible for us to do. But if we can identify what's priority standards, what's essential, and make sure that those get taught, that's going to be our effort. And that's going to be everybody's effort across the state, is to identify those and get those taught. So I think that's the goal from what I'm hearing. And kudos to you guys with the work you've already done.
I would just add to Aaron, I do agree that it is a huge jump from going with a voluntary model to a required model, but I just want to remind the group that we basically went from our teachers having a vague understanding of being able to use some of the Google products to being able to record themselves, push out lessons, create a Google site in a relatively short amount of time. And that was truly due to the collaboration of all of our team, our tech department, our instructional coaches, our teachers' willingness to jump in and try something that was clearly completely new to them. So I know that it is a huge challenge, but I have been so impressed with the work that they were willing to do in such a relatively short amount of time that I have no doubt that they are committed, they are willing, and they want to do that work. They want to do what's best for kids. So if that helps you know from, we started at 1 and we went to 5 in no time. So I am really excited for what's coming.
Yeah, I'm not taking away from any of the effort. I think it's a huge amount of effort that went into just what we did. I'm I know that what our goals are. Are we being realistic about that and really going to be able to deliver that this upcoming year in a completely online environment? We talked through a bunch of reasons why online wasn't working and access and some of those things. Are we really going after that goal? That's really, and do we have enough support? Have we given all of you enough things that we need to, and the students enough to really be able to deliver a full year of learning online? That's all. I'm just, one, I wanted to ask Terry if that was the goal, and two, just do we have everything that we need to make that successful? And so that's where it was coming from.
May I add on there is that if I've got it also correctly, if we think about it, if we would end up doing, like, say, either back to school or hybrid, and then all of a sudden something happened and we had to go online, my interpretation would be is if we have that then ability, we've already tried to guarantee we have that ability to be online all year round. It would be, I don't want to say a snap to do it, but we would be prepared. Does that sound correct?
Yeah.
We know that a number of our students may choose, for whatever health reasons, other things, to not come back. If that is the case, we have to make sure that we provide a continuous online model seamlessly moving forward throughout that whole process. So if we do hit another, problem area, another place where we have to shut down, that we have the ability to kind of function within that environment and provide a level of instruction that's necessary. And I commend Aaron for asking the question. Our goal is not to aim low, but to aim high, knowing that we're going to have problems along the way. This will not be easy work. This will be a lot of heavy lifting, and it will be a lot of modifications and figuring it out yet. And I know that sounds scary somewhat, but it is also authentic, and it is also the fact that we have great people around us that are going to be committed to making excellence happen.
Yeah.
And Terry, just follow up. I mean, I do agree with everything that everybody said. And I do believe that we have a staff that are very professional in doing so and turning that. My concern, as I mentioned before, is reaching the 100% of our students. This is, I think, the biggest challenge that all of us and you as a team that you always need to deal with. Let's face it, there's no way we can, if we reach that level of delivering everything online, we need to have some sort of an alternative way, because again, there's no way that we can reach 100% of our students via internet. And that's because, again, some of our students don't have the access to internet. And that's why I go back to the point that I mentioned before. But I have no doubt that you as a team and the staff and the teachers at our district can be very professional in putting together all this for even a full year. But please keep that in mind, that how can we reach those students, 100% students, online and or different ways in case if something like that happened.
I'd like to just jump in for a second too. And this is actually really exciting, right? We have a great opportunity here. There's been a lot of challenges, but I know for Muscatine, and I know up here, just the learning that's happened for our staff, really being thrown into this, right? Everything that you guys are talking about today, we're really talking about best practice, right? These are all best practices. We're talking about rapid cycle assessment. We're talking about using Google Classroom, MTSS, what our tier 1, what our core, that's absolutely what we should be doing. And so, I think the challenge is that we've had to try to squeeze all of this in a short period of time. But I think we can do that. I think, again, with the training and support and putting a focus on that, and it's going to continue to move us in the right direction. It's not going to be perfect, right? Just like we weren't in a spot to have it ready to go in March. It's not going to be perfect, and it should be a continuous process, right? And we're going to learn from it. In order to meet the needs of all kids, we really have to do all of this work, though, right? Because, again, different, I think, in Muscatine, because you have that voluntary model. But when you require all students to do that, we know that students need that. They need that contact with other people. They need that contact with teachers, but some of our kids are thriving in the online environment. And so if we totally shut that off for them, now we're going to put them at a disadvantage. So how do we continue to provide those supports and interventions and assess where kids are at and still provide those online options? And that's what all of this does for us. So, again, it really is some exciting work that I think across the nation is going to move education forward for us. And this plan really digs into that. And I just appreciate all the work that's been done on this. And again, it's not going to be picture perfect day one, but then we know what are the things that we need to support teachers with. We know they all need to be able to really deliver with Google Classroom. They need to be able to deliver that assessment cycle. They need to know what those essential skills are. And that's causing a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue right now. So again, as challenging as all of this has been, it's also really an exciting time to be doing this and to be doing it together as a team. So I just wanted to put that in there as everyone was sharing some pieces.
Yeah, and I'm just going to finish with if I asked at one of the businesses that I worked at for the staff to do something over and above what they do on a regular basis, not only deal with the COVID and everything we've had to, coming back, having new classrooms, sanitation, all those other pieces, and then build an online curriculum at the same time that's going to cover the full year, I think I'd be getting asked for, more staff, more money, more dollars. And I don't hear that ask coming, right? So I'm just making sure, I believe all of you, everyone working on this is working extremely hard, but do we have enough to make this really all happen? And so that's all I'm trying to push for, is do we really have what we need to do to be successful, trying to go down all of these paths at the same time? So I'll just leave it.
Aaron, to piggyback off of that, I kind of thought the same thing. Is it with all of the things and as fluid as this is going to be, with as much change as this going to happen early in the beginning of the year, do we consider, and I don't need an answer tonight, but I would ask the group to consider possibly the first 2 weeks being half days, for no other reason than to give teachers a morning or part of a day to look at what's happening, and then have time built in the afternoons to get into their PLCs, because we've been spending a lot of time with our PLCs, or I think they're becoming better. But then they would have that time built in where they could evaluate the day or the week, or say, okay, what do we need to change, and be very responsive to things instead of waiting. I just don't know that we have enough PLC time right now to be as responsive as maybe we need to be early in the year. I think 2 weeks or a week of early outs to start with. One, it's going to ease kids back into it. They've had 6 months off almost, and instead of going to a full 8-hour day, they start with a 6-hour day. But just my thoughts.
And that's not a bad idea, Mike. The thing you do want to keep in mind is the state's not giving any latitude on hours. And so if you go with 2 weeks of half days for kids, but full days for teachers, you just want to make sure you have enough teacher days to make sure you get your minimum hours in at the end of the year. That just as a thing to keep in mind.
All right, are we able to transition into special populations? All right, hearing no voices, I'm going to move us in that direction. So I would like to introduce Andy Whirling, Candy Steele, and Corey Spies, as they will be presenting for the special population groups. And we'll follow the same format with any questions being asked at the end. So Andy, I pass the mic to you.
Hey, thanks, Becky. Hi, good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to thank our subcommittee members that helped us out. We had close to 20 people on our subcommittee representing all levels and varieties of programs, and just couldn't thank those individuals enough. The problem statement we were asked to look at was developing models and protocols for special education students and their needs in terms of IEP requirements, class modifications, classroom supports, assessment and learning status, etc. And as we looked through the 3 different scenarios, one thing came very apparent, that by the nature of special education and IEPs, a lot of our recommendations are going to be individualized per students and for programs. And we probably use the phrase case by case basis dozens of times in our document. But getting started, our first recommendation, more of a proactive one, is to use the first couple of weeks of school to develop students and teachers' capacity for the virtual learning that may take place in the event of a disruption. So these would be learning skills, ensuring access, IEP progress monitoring, just to be as proactive as we can with our students as early as we can. Our next recommendation is for teachers to reevaluate and determine current baselines for all IEP students and their goals, and make any amendments as necessary. Our recommendation is for that to be done within the first 4 to 5 weeks, if at all possible, to be done sooner. We're also recommending that we continue operating IEP meetings virtually unless it's deemed necessary to hold them face to face. So taking all social distancing precautions that may be a factor at the beginning of the school year. We're also recommending that if students do not return to school for any reasons, either compromise, amused, parent choice, etc., that they transition quickly into a mandatory online learning model so that we can provide the necessary components of their IEP and their specially designed instruction as quickly as we can. If we transition into some type of hybrid or alternative schedule, our recommendation is that students would continue to receive their specially designed instruction face-to-face to the maximum extent possible, just knowing the value that places for special education students. We're also recommending that co-teaching models and schedules would be reevaluated at that time to use staff, teachers, pairs, and other supports to the maximum extent possible. In the event that school would transition into entirely to a virtual or online learning program, our recommendation is that teams would review and amend IEPs to reflect that classroom in-class physical classroom time is no longer taking place, and then that pairs would be used to a maximum extent possible for instructional support for whatever the learning is being done by the special education teacher or the content area teacher. And that really sums up our big picture, our recommendations for developing protocols for special education students and programs. Thank you.
I have a question, but it actually kind of leads in also for other students, because you mentioned here about the parent choice about if they end up wanting to do online because they do not feel comfortable with their child being in school, and that is definitely something that is for special needs population that they get. Now, then it comes to Terry, when from there is, what does that mean for the rest of our student population? In other words, when we mentioned earlier about there may be some that do not want to have their child come back. So we're not going to be doing anything that penalizes or anything. In other words, we're saying, oh, you have to have a medical need, why they're not going to do whatever we show that is the standard that we're going to be using. Does that make sense? Terry?
I had taken off my mute. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yes. I mean, all of those things are things that we need to be aware of and working through as we go through. So, I mean, we're actually going to have our subcommittee re-pull together tomorrow and bring up some of the thoughts that are brought up tonight to just review, and that will be something that we'll discuss also.
Yeah, I think, Karen, too, we need to make sure parents understand that they do not have an excuse. They cannot be excused from compulsory attendance. Their kids are still going to have to be in a school setting, be it online or something. And so I think we're going to have to make sure that people don't opt out to completely opt out.
Andy, I do have one question, and I don't think that you addressed it or brought it up, but in reading the bullets of your proposal, there was one bullet that I needed clarification for.
Sure, yes.
It was schools must have the flexibility to use teachers within their special education capacity, or Strat 1 and Strat 2 to meet the needs of the students in their buildings. Can you kind of clarify what the thought of the committee was, or what that bullet was about?
Yeah, great question. So that was more in a response to, we know that one of our limits in certification with special education is some of our special education teachers, by virtue of their license, can't work with all special education students, if that makes sense so far.
Yeah.
So the hope was, at the time in March, if we transition to a alternate schedule of any kind, would the Department of Education or the Board of Educational Examiners allow for some kind of flex in terms of licensure restrictions? Because particularly if you go, it was suggested today. Well, Mike, you brought this up. Like a half-day model.
Right.
That may or may not be possible with students' IEP needs.
Right.
And so if teachers are going to be used in PLCs on one of those days or some of those periods, our hope was, with that bullet point to keep in mind, would the state allow us some flexibility?
Okay, so there's more of a state. I was just hoping that it wasn't kind of that we wanted to be able to move people all around, because I know we've been working really hard to get Strat 2 people, but I kind of feel sometimes that we rob Peter to pay Paul, and it's just because circumstances that we're stuck with right now. But I think that it doesn't matter what kid you have, what building has them. All of our teachers are working hard, and they're needed in the buildings they're at. So.
No, yeah, it's a really good question. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Candy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Candy Steele, principal at Jefferson Elementary. And our group was tasked with developing a model of support for our most at-risk students. This group of students would include students with poor attendance, social emotional needs, health needs, and family difficulties, including but not limited to homelessness or food insecurities. So we thought about this in terms of district oversight as well as building implementation. In terms of district oversight, we recommend that there's a continued effort to problem solve related equity and access for all students who need to remain at home for online learning. This would include technology and technology support, access to internet, quality instruction, and special consideration for English language learners and translation for families. We also felt there should be support for each school to create a safety plan for students who are having attendance issues, anxiety about returning to school, transitioning students, and students with chronic medical needs, and for students who are significantly performing academically below grade level. Our group recommends that we track and collect data to see how the plan is being implemented and whether or not it's successful. We suggested that clarity be provided related to attendance expectations that are aligned with CDC and compulsory attendance laws. So what happens if a child has a fever? How long do they have to stay home? What do we do if we have children that are just not coming to school? We know what we would do if we were in a normal situation, but what are we going to do moving forward? In case we have to provide online learning in the future, our team suggested that we develop an online learning platform, and that's been talked about this evening, with training for teachers, parents, and students. We also felt it might be important to provide information on guidelines for homeschooling. I don't know that parents sometimes realize what's expected when they say, well, I'll just homeschool my child. There's a lot to that, and maybe we provide more information about that. Our team thought it would be helpful to have at least one full-time counselor and one full-time nurse available in each building to help meet students' needs. Currently, all of our schools, except for Milk, have at least one full-time counselor. And we currently have a 1 to 605 nursing ratio in our district. The state recommendation is 1 to 750. Currently, we do not have a full-time nurse in each building, so that might be something that we would want to talk about. As for the individual buildings, we suggest a holistic approach to meeting the needs of students, focusing on their social, emotional, mental health, physical wellness, and academic success. And we would recommend that we develop a student success team and a building leadership team in all buildings that would closely monitor and create plans for addressing these 4 areas of need for individual students and families. That's it for us.
I guess I have a question about the full-time counselors. We do have a full-time counselor at every building. I just saw that we hired a 80% at Franklin. Is that correct, Jerry?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Joelle.
Sorry. Nope. I was just going to say we did. She actually will be a full-time counselor. She's just finishing up, Denny. She has like a little bit of her internship hours. But we do have an additional half-time counselor already at Franklin. So they would actually be a little bit over the full-time counseling role. But as soon as she finishes her internship, the goal is to move her to full-time. She just can't do all that stuff. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jerry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's good.
Candy, you mentioned at the beginning about ensuring equity access for all students need to remain at home on online learning. And of course, we talked a little bit about that before. So what do you have anything other than that statement? In other words, are we looking at a plan of action that has to do with, like, say, MSA and Flicking Learning, or any of the companies in town, and you know what I'm saying, some of our partners that we could possibly work at to make sure that these things are there?
You know, Karen, one of the things that we talked about is we left so suddenly that we were on spring break. Next thing you know, we're just closed. And so we had talked about how important it would be to get with families from the get-go and talk about access. There are a lot of ways, like the $10 a month. And while we have some families that maybe don't have the $10 a month, we probably have quite a few that do, just don't know how to access it, don't know how to put it in place. I don't know that our teachers know really how to guide yet. You know, what are some of the options? What are some of the ways? You know, you can come to the Jefferson parking lot. I don't know how many of our families even know that, or go to MCC in their parking lot, because we just had such a, you know, just everything was just cut off so quickly. So just really do the very best we can to try to get as many kids and families as possible connected from the start, and then to really be clear about which kids don't have access, and then what can we do to really provide them with a meaningful experience and keep them caught up with the rest of the group.
All right, that helps some, but I do believe that there's ought to be some way that we can reach out to some of those you know, places that organizations in town that have been so valuable in working with that same group of folks and stuff, what they can do to partner with or help. So as if somebody could be a liaison with them and talk to them about where some of those needs are. Because yes, I know that we ourselves in America speaking, there's only so much communication, so much that we can take and do, but here, hand the ball off to them and say, here, what can you do then to help these folks?
Thank you so much for that suggestion. Absolutely.
All right. Well, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, Beck. I know that there's a lot of overlap, and this might be covered later on, but looking at the guidelines for the attendance at school, one of the things I jotted down on here with the 72 hours fever-free, that should also be without Tylenol. I mean, we've all been around where they kind of mask it as parents. No, my kid hasn't had, I've been feeding them Tylenol for 5 days, but they don't have a fever. Oh, okay, yeah. And have we started to talk about, I know as a board, one of the things that I'm fearing, and the conversation I don't want to have is, what if we have to require a mask, and what happens if somebody says, no, I'm not going to require a mask? You know, do we say that that's part of the dress code and we treat it just like a dress code violation? I would also say, what happens if somebody, do we have places, are we trying to designate places in buildings that are infirmaries? Because the nurses' offices, I've been in most of the buildings and they're not very big. So if we get an influx of kids, what are we going to do if all of a sudden 10 or 15 kids have fevers? Where's the holding pen, basically? Those are things I'm just kind of wondering if those conversations that are happening right now or what's going on.
Yeah, so Mike, yes, and yes to all of those questions. Rest assured, we had several nurses involved in the planning and talking. And so I'm thinking that some of these things are going to be addressed. If not, we'll come back and I'll write down that question to make sure that we answer it later. But I have a feeling it's going to be answered shortly.
Yeah, and Becky, again, I didn't expect anything tonight. I just, thoughts of mine, just take them to the group and share them.
I wrote it down. So I think, Corey, you are up next.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Good evening. I'd like to also take a moment to thank my subcommittee members. I've worked very closely with Jesse Frears, with Carrie Hawkins, Edwin Colon, on our problem statement, which was to develop a model to provide appropriate mental health supports and access. And if you've been following the news, as countries are restarting school, we recognize that this is an immediate need with students who have been out of school for a significant amount of time and who are re-entering back into the school setting with pressures. And so making sure that they are having access to resources is a super important part of this transition back to learning. And the first recommendation that we had, as we kind of reviewed over the last couple months and the data that we've had, we want to make sure that we are making access for families to mental health resources easier than perhaps it has been. We know that the information has been posted on our Return to Learn site, but at times different levels you may have to dig a little deeper. So our first priority was to make sure that we had that information clearly and readily accessible. And we also recognize that we may have families without internet access who may not be able to reach that. And I would just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our counselors and our resource navigators who have had their hands on, and fingers on the pulse of that over the last several months and have maintained contact with some of our families that we know this is a concern. And they've been able to reach out, and we've been able to coordinate cares over the last 6 weeks or so, or however long, with telehealth services through providers. And so we've continued to provide those services that we had established early on in the school year, but we want to make sure that we're continuing to provide those and making it easier to access. So that was recommendation one. The second recommendation was that we look to develop a screener that we can use PK-12 in our district that will help us determine the mental health dispositions of students and could help identify those students who might need support. And we reached out to the state for that, and we've received information back that they are actually working to develop a screener and will send information out to us once they have some more information to share. Again, so that is a recommendation, but currently in on awaiting a state update there. And then thirdly, we wanted to make sure that we are providing mental health and social emotional resources for the staff who are working with our students. Our staff are the eyes and ears. You don't necessarily need a screener as a teacher to be able to see firsthand in your classroom or a student walking through the building that maybe there's a need there that we need to provide support for. So it's super important that we provide that professional development for our counselors, our at-risk staff, our teachers, our navigators. And so we've talked a little bit about what that looks like. And of course, it looks a little different at the elementary and secondary levels. But what we're recommending is that at the elementary level, we would be providing weekly counseling meetings with the school counselor, the full-time counselor in each building. And we'd be encouraging elementary teachers to maintain their classroom morning meetings that takes place in many of our elementary schools. So our recommendation is to continue those, and if they're not currently taking place, to implement those so that they would be an opportunity for students to share and to acclimate back to the school setting. At the secondary level, we are looking at the musky time opportunity that exists within the day as an opportunity to be able to inventory and survey students and talk about what needs there may be at that level. And then we're also looking at it's a professional development opportunity for our secondary staff called Mental Health First Aid, and that's for students ages 12 to 18. So those are the recommendations of our group from a mental health standpoint. And I will tell you, I forgot to introduce myself, but I am Corey Spees, and I'm currently principal at Central Middle School. I'll be at Franklin Elementary next year. And one of my other duties is I work very closely with our resource navigators and our district nurses. And so, Mike, to your point and question about some of these other things, we're going to hear a little later in the evening from Wendy Donald, one of our district nurses, about some of those questions. But I would say to you this, there are a lot of things at this point that we are still looking to the state for guidance as we seek to develop these return to learn plans. And so what some of these things will look like, we may not be able to answer at this time, but I want to thank the nurses for their work in staying on top of the latest information that we do have, and then being flexible and being able to work through the summer to be able to put some of these things in place.
Corey, you have a here down about PK through 12 about having a last day before the first day in August. Students start at their 1920 building to provide closure. I guess the question begs is like, how are we seeing the transition for, say, the students that are going from grade school to middle school or middle school to high school? That in itself is a normal transition that we work with. And so how do you perceive that we figure out a way sometime before school actually starts, kind of like an open house? You know, what's the thoughts here?
Yeah, Karen, that's a great question. And I'm in a unique position this year as we've worked to merge the two middle schools. Chris and I have, before this, we're talking quite a bit about what would it look like to be able to orient Central students to the new Susan Clark Junior High. And so we had great plans for that and had some ideas. And then kind of we went back to the drawing board to look at these. And we recognize that there are a lot of sixth grade elementary students who are going to be transitioning to the new building and need that start as well. And this is just kind of an indication of how things are fluidly changing. This wasn't a recommendation very early on that we considered as a recommendation for the student mental health standpoint. We thought maybe it would be important to provide some closure and to be able to move forward. And then as we've read on this, as kind of Joelle alluded to earlier, that idea that we really just kind of start where we are in real time. We recognize the resilience and we try to move forward. And so we're not necessarily sure that needs to be a recommendation. In fact, through the vetting process, we received some feedback that maybe that wouldn't be a priority in our community. But I will tell you that we still need to make sure that we are doing those things at the start of the year to figure out how to orient students to their new locations, whether it be a transition in buildings to an entirely different school, or even just coming back into their current building with a new teacher, right?
Corey, along those lines, I might suggest, I don't know what our open day is or what we're planning on to open, but maybe on August 1st, for those kids and families that really need a little bit more, would it be possible, or the committee could look into the possibility of kids and families scheduling in for a half hour into a building just to go in and become familiar? And that way you can still, but everything would have to be scheduled through however the building did it. That way you could limit the number of people in a building at a time and make sure that there was somebody there to walk them through quickly. We can all give a building tour in a half hour. It would make everybody feel great, and not everybody needs it, but there are some families that really, some kids that would need that. I would think that would be something that we might look at too.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. I think I know we've talked about it in different staff circles, and staff are completely on board with that. I think we're going to be kind of up against what would the capacity and restrictions be that we're awaiting from the state to figure out what our next step might be and how soon we might be able to do that. But that's a great idea.
Corey, I was just want to thank you. I really was happy to see this in the plan, because it is definitely a need, because I feel that our students, the mental health of our students is going to be a big need this year because of the COVID and how they dealt with it and how their parents are dealing with it. It's a tough situation. So I really appreciate this being in there.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Denny, and I can't take the credit for it. Again, this is a team effort, and these are folks who are developing things that we recognize are a need in our community, and figuring out how we can best respond. So,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I am going to pass it on to Mike, who oversees, is the chair for the operations group.
Thanks, Becky. This should be really short in operations because everything's really crystal clear on all the information we have for operations. But no, really, we look forward to hearing from you tonight as board members, because there are a lot of issues in operations, and we would be really interested in your feedback on some of these issues. The presenters tonight, we have Stacy Olson, Jeff Miller, Alicia Eggers, Jill Berkwin, Ryan Castle, Tom Olsis, and Wendy Donald. And then Lisa Bunn will share out our communication plan. So I will now turn it over to Stacy Olson.
Good evening, everyone. I serve as the principal at Mulberry, and our subcommittee was to look and develop a revised school calendar for next year. And our calendar committee is recommending that we stay with the original calendar that was approved by the board. We have added a note at the top that states, due to COVID-19, the calendar is subject to change. But we wanted everyone to know that the start date of Monday, August 24th will remain the same and is not going to be subject to change. Most of our recommendation came from the fact that if we started earlier than Monday, August 24th, those had to be additional days beyond our 180 days, which would require additional financial resources. So that was the main reason for us staying with the Monday, August 24th date. And that was the only recommendation that our subcommittee looked at.
Next we have, go ahead, Karen.
I was just going to say, and it may not be the appropriate spot to ask this, but as we are looking at all of this, many things that we are looking at, do we have an idea of when we need to be able to, the word I want to use, bless what plan we are using? Are we going, back to school? We're doing hybrid, we're doing online. When are we need to be required to do that? Because we will need to make sure that parents alone, let alone teachers, get prepared for that, especially because anything has to do with childcare and all.
Right. Yeah, and Stacy, jump in if you have things to add to this too, is that we have talked a lot about that. We're Tammy alluded to it at the beginning of our meeting, that we're really hopeful that we will get a lot more direction on recommendations come early July. Certainly one of our goals is, because we know the calendar issue and the scheduling has a huge impact on families. We want to get that information out as early as possible. So our goal is to certainly do that. But what we want to avoid is where we're putting out information, then changing it and so forth. So we hope by early July, Karen, that we'll have a lot more insight to what that's going to look like if we have to look at a hybrid and so forth. If we have to look at different types of schedules, but I would concur with you. I think the earlier the better. Next, we have Jeff Miller.
Good evening, everybody. I first would like to say, Jerry, I took your last recommendation. I kept my camera off as long as I could, as you told me to. So our problem statement is developing cleaning and other safety protocols for reopening and continuing operations. With that being said, I would like to thank my subcommittee, which brings a lot of years of experience of clean and disinfecting protocols. I'd also like to add that I'd like the board to know that in late February, I worked with my staff and we started ordering products, not knowing if the school year would continue or not knowing what we're dealing with. And we have those products set back at a separate location, and the building itself still has plenty because we've been shut down since March. Our recommendations are as followed. Facilities possibly remain closed after school day hours until social distancing guidelines are truly, allowed. Adjust temperatures maybe up a little bit. As everybody knows, you all know that we go from 68 to 70, maybe increase it a degree or two to help maybe spread the bacteria. Also, the flow of outside air, increase that a little more. We do the recommendation of what the state requires us to do. Drinking fountains the bubblers will be disconnected, but bottle fillers will still be allowed. The other thing, custodians have face shields used for disinfecting. Additional hand sanitizer stations throughout all buildings. Presentation, this is key, presentation to staff members, the proper way to use the product, safe for students and their environments. What this means is we would probably do a video and go to each building individually when the principals have their staff meeting and show them how to use the sanitizers that we're supplying in their classroom for them. Not to mention that the nighttime custodians will be doing most of the disinfecting. So in each building, one of the questions was, how do we reach the custodians? Well, a lot of the buildings, I believe, have walkie-talkies that the custodians, you have them wear, or they use it over the intercom. So with that short presentation, and let me say, ours is going to be the toughest because we're going to have to look at schedules and everything else as we move down the road, depending on what the school day looks like and everything else. So we're prepared to deal with that. With that, I'll take any questions.
Hey, Jeff. One of the things I saw that Jill was planning on doing was creating a module to onboard people. With your presentation, could that be turned into a module as well, so that people, maybe you give the presentation, but they also, everybody, whether it's new people or current staff, have to go through, just like any other PD that we have that's online, whether it's hazardous materials or whatnot, go through and make it a 5-10 minute that they just have to, some type of module that they would have to fill out or complete online.
Mike, that is a great question, and I will work with Jill on that because I think that's an awesome idea.
One of the things we also recognize, this committee's done a great job with recognizing that this feedback from that Gwen presented earlier on the survey feedback, there was a huge concern about how we're going to keep things sanitized within our buildings. And they've done a great job of looking at all those questions and all the feedback. And we certainly are trying to be proactive as far as incorporating all those recommendations and thoughts into, our recommendations. So we next up have Alicia Eggers, and is going to go give you an overview of food service.
Hey, Mike, before we jump there, sorry.
Yep, no problem.
I had a question on if there is like an outbreak or a student or a staff is diagnosed with COVID, what is this the place where that procedure would be as well? Do we have an understanding of what that would look like? And
yeah, actually, Aaron, and if this doesn't get answered when Wendy goes through the section, if that doesn't, I'll be glad to come back to that and answer anything. But we know that's another ancillary to this, that's a really important thing we're going to have in place.
Okay. All right. That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Regardless of schedules, we know we'll feed kids and we know how to do it. I'd like to thank our committee members. We had a diverse group so that we had that provided the variety in the school district, the different levels. One principal, 2 managers, 2 from the high school, 2 from West, and 2 from the elementary level. And with phase 1, we've got a modified grab and go process. For breakfast at the elementary level, students will enter the building and go straight to their classrooms where a hot or cold sack breakfast will be available. At middle and high school, we have students entering in one location, exiting through another location to be served breakfast. Floors will be marked indicating where to stand 6 feet apart in line. Stanchions will be used to promote single line formation. Students will need to keep their hands to themselves. Students will still have a variety of foods to choose from. Students will be served a sack breakfast and go straight to their classrooms or designated seating areas. For lunch, phase 1, students will eat at elementary level. Students will eat in their classroom instead of cafeterias. Lunches will still be provided using the main and alternate options and delivered in a sack or container to the classroom. Middle and high school students will enter one location and exit another location to be served lunch. Floors again will be marked indicating the 6 feet apart in line. Stanchions will be continued to use for single line formation. Students will keep their hands to themselves. Students will have a larger variety of foods to choose from. And students at that time will be served a sack lunch and go straight to their classrooms or designated seating areas. I had some questions regarding a la carte sales because we are allowed to serve what's called smart snacks through USDA. At the elementary level, students will still be able to purchase items such as an extra carton of milk or Humphreys in addition to the regular school meal. At middle and high school, students may continue to purchase items in addition to the regular school meal, but food nutrition staff will serve them instead of them serving themselves. For home lunches for phase 1 and phase 2, elementary students may bring packed meals from home. All components of the meal will need to remain in the student's backpack until meal time. All containers need to be easy to open by students. Home meals may not be shared with anyone, and cartons of milk will still be able to be purchased from meal accounts. Middle and high school students may bring the packed meals from home. Their meals will have to remain in their backpack or locker until mealtime, and they will still be able to purchase a variety of beverages with meal accounts. Handling cash, and this is for phase 1 and phase 2. At the elementary level, all meal account payments will need to be received in the main offices. At middle and high school, all meal payments, including for a la carte sales, will need to be deposited into meal accounts prior to meal service. We will designate a time and a place for this to take place in the cafeteria areas. Parents may use InTouch through their Power School account or My School Bucks. And once this plan is approved, then we have a letter of communication that we have to send out annually. So all of that would be updated there. Service lines for phase 1 and phase 2 at the elementary and middle school levels. Service lines will not be able to be used for thoroughfares to get through the buildings. At the high school level, we ask that they're limited as thoroughfares to get through the building. Special diets, phase 1 and phase 2. Meals will be clearly labeled with student names. At the middle schools and high school level, they may have some choices, and we hope to come up with an online ordering system that those students might be able to use with the modified diets. In addition, self-service items at the elementary, fruit and vegetable self-serve items will not be available for pickup. Food and nutrition staff will serve those items. Appropriate condiment, squeeze bottles, or packets will be provided for classroom staff to serve or distribute to students. Middle and high school, fruit and vegetable self-serve condiment bars will not be available. Food nutrition staff will serve those items and individual condiment packets will be provided as allowed. Sharing tables for phase 1 and phase 2. Food and beverages from home or school meals may not be shared with others. Hand washing for phase 1 and phase 2. All students will be required to wash their hands before meal periods or sessions. And resources needed for phase 1 at the elementary level. We need classroom support to assist in regulatory documentation and handing out of meals. Lunch tables at the elementary level will need to be stored outside the kitchen prep and service areas to make room for the prepping and packing of sack lunches. At the middle school level, we may need additional meal periods or sessions. At the middle school and high school, additional supervision for students while going through the service lines and during meal periods or sessions. Additional support for enforcing the wearing of scannable ID lanyards. At high school, increase meal periods or sessions from 2 to 5 meal periods. Example versus A and B, moving to A, B, C, D, and E. And then I've added there to work with technology department. That's you, Scott, to develop an online ordering system, even if it's just like a Google survey type thing. Phase 2, we have a continued modified grab and go. At the preschool and kindergarten level, they would continue to be served in the classrooms for breakfast and lunch. Grades 1 through 6, we would slowly transition back to breakfast and lunch lines using the tight procedures, standing 6 feet apart, hands to themselves, and not entering the serving area until directed. Floors would be marked indicating where students would stand 6 feet apart. Lunches would still be served with the main and alternate options. Students will not serve themselves fruits, vegetables, condiments, napkins, silverware. Food and nutrition staff and building staff would help serve those items. Students will be served packaged meals and go straight to their classrooms or designated seating areas. And then I've added perhaps only those eating breakfast would be allowed in the cafeteria in the morning. Those not eating breakfast could go to gyms or assigned areas to be determined. Phase 2, middle school and high school. Breakfast, lunch, and a la carte sales, same as phase 1 with added food options. Home lunches, same as phase 1 with added beverage options. Resources needed for phase 2 elementary is just continued classroom support to assist regulatory documentation and handing out of meals, and still the lunch tables would have to be stored outside the kitchen and prep areas. At middle school, I just listed again that we might need additional meal sessions or periods. At middle school and high school, still need the continued support with supervision during meal periods and sessions, and then continued support to enforce the wearable scannable ID lanyards. And we would also be able to, under circumstances, maybe possibly deliver to areas of the buildings. And we would ask for patience as our service times may exceed 6 seconds per student, as students may appear like kindergartners on the first day in the lunchroom.
Any questions?
Alicia, I do have a question. This is John. One of the points that you mentioned while you are presenting is that for elementary schools level, that the money will be paid at the offices. So I assume the office of each elementary building, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so the kitchen staff will not handle money. That's
not at the elementary level.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Alicia, thank you for the work you've done. And I also want to say thank you to all of the administrators who will be creating those new lunch schedules, making sure that everybody gets a duty-free lunch. So thank you to all of the hard work that the administrators are going to do with this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. We know there's a lot of details that will have to be worked out with. Yeah.
Yeah. Alicia, you mentioned at the very beginning that several times about the possible need for support staff for doing certain things. And is that with something that you have of means with staff you already have? Or are you talking something else? And is that temporary, or what is the needs there?
So when I talk about support in the classroom, that means with typically when we would serve in a line, there's a transaction that happens that's proof that a student got a reimbursable meal. They would exchange their card for their meal. In the classroom, we're hoping that what we can do is just provide a laminated class list, and a teacher or para can mark off who took their, that took their meals, so that we can just scan those barcode laminated sheets. If they don't approve that, then we would have to provide a sheet similar to what Jesse Freer's teachers are using at Milk, where it just verifies that those kids got the meal. It would just be a signature stating that Billy, Karen, Mike got the meal. And then with the service lines at the middle schools is just additional supervision to make sure that students are keeping their keeping their social distancing, their hands to themselves, that type of thing.
Alicia, I had, oh, sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Sorry, Aaron. And I know this isn't necessarily food service, but since we're talking about food, have we talked about special treats in the classroom, or providing snacks for a long day, or thinking about when we're doing long days of testing that sometimes we ask parents to help with snacks? Have we somewhere addressed what that will look like, or I'm assuming not look like?
So are you asking this as in an extended day, or those special circumstances when there's testing and that type of thing going on?
Both. And again, I'm not sure either falls specifically to you, but as we're talking about food, and I'm just thinking about other times that we see food in the classroom, and I'm guessing we've covered it somewhere, but I didn't know if maybe that was a topic because that food's not always coming from you all. It's me bringing in celery and peanut butter for 20 kids in a classroom as a parent, right? Which I'm assuming will not happen any longer.
Right. Yeah, and that we should have put, that's something that we need to add to that, because I don't think it's safe to do that at all. We thought that we would provide help, like we can provide options for parents to purchase from us, which it might be, it could be potentially cartons of milk. It could be we provide 100% juices. There's a variety of different things. All of our items are whole grain. We have the 100-calorie snacks. There's a variety of different things that we can provide. But it does need to be in here.
Okay, so something that would say it's prepackaged and not coming from home and not being brought in.
And I would say even in the original packages, because, if they buy a box of ding dongs and they take them all out of the box and throw them in a sack, we probably don't want that either. And somebody probably also needs to, hand those out versus everybody coming to grab them. So I'm glad you brought that up. With an extended day, we may qualify for a snack program through USDA that we may be able to provide that snack with extended days. Now, things like testing, that sort of thing, that's not something that we would be able to do without charging someone for it.
Aaron, did you have a question?
I did, yes. So Alicia, I wanted to thank you and the staff for everything that you've done the last 4 months to continue to provide the meals for all of our students. If there's anything to be proud of as a district, and all the building staff that it takes to do, I think that's a pretty amazing thing. But my question is specific to breakfast, and I think students can arrive before teachers. And how will that work now, or is that going to be allowed now, where students can come to the buildings before the teaching staff is there, and because they wouldn't be able to get to a room if a teacher isn't there, so how is that going to work going forward?
I think someone else is going to have to take that question on.
I can tell you, Aaron, that that group has talked a lot about that. And that's a detail we need to work out. We know well, the point you're making is that basically, if we're going to allow students to come in earlier, we're going to have to somehow manage it, because staff, our teachers will not be coming in earlier. And so we have to figure that out. So it hasn't been determined yet what time we're going to offer breakfast, but we know that's an issue.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Next we have up Jill Berkwin.
Hi, everyone. I am Jill Berkwin, HR Director, and our subcommittee was comprised of Wendy Donald and myself, and we reached out to Megan from Public Health and the HR team. And I want to thank all of those folks for their input and feedback on preparing our plan. And our problem statement is to develop a model to onboard new staff and health safety training, in particular COVID-19 for all staff. So we plan to create a virtual training plan based on CDC and public health guidelines to be completed by current staff, new staff, and substitutes, preferably before the start of the 2020-21 school year. And our training plan would include an overview of COVID-19, basic strategies on how to protect oneself and others, MCSD employee practices and procedures pertaining to COVID-19 in the workplace. And Aaron, this would include whatever Jeff would like us to include as far as cleaning and disinfecting protocols. We would embed that into our training plan so that everyone is aware. Would also include a communication procedure between the buildings and the admin center to manage COVID-19 scenarios so that we can keep Clint and others apprised of the number of COVID-19 cases so they can make decisions and determinations about moving forward, whether we need to close buildings or the district or other things that we might need to do going forward in that regard. And the last thing that our training plan would include are processes that still need to be developed. We have started looking at them. And the processes would be for staff to follow if becoming ill, if staff are a high risk or live with a high risk person, if someone has been exposed or believe they have been exposed to COVID-19, and employees who have traveled outside of the state and outside of the country, or any other concerns that employees might have to bring forward. And one of the questions was, could our virtual training plan be similar to the Safe Schools training modules that we currently use for bloodborne pathogens and hazardous chemicals in the workplace? And the answer to that is yes. One of the components of Safe Schools is that we can create our own training and deliver that through the Safe Schools model.
Any questions?
I have one, Jill, because I actually look back on the plan that we approved to the governor, and I know Becky earlier had mentioned that we could take and amend, what's going on, because I noticed that on the health and safety here that we had answered no to both of the questions that have you administrators completed the health and safety module for administrators and such. So I'm assuming that's what you're talking about here.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Right. And Karen, the reason why we answer that no, because at this point in time, we haven't done that. We know we're going to, but we kind of thought we better answer that as real time. So.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next we have up Ryan Castle, who's going to talk about transportation.
Hey, Mike, can I ask you a question really quick?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sure. Yep.
Jill, do we have any opportunity that the module that we're thinking about creating, will the Department of Ed be creating something? Is there something that will be done that we can leverage and use versus something that's just, we may have some things that we want specific to us, but a lot of these topics, I would think a lot of school districts are also addressing.
Well, we will certainly take into, consideration CDC guidelines, public health, excuse me, recommendations, and anything from the Department of Ed.
But they wouldn't have an online module that they would already create that we could tag onto and use. That's kind of what I was looking for, as opposed to having to create our own.
If they do, we certainly can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Ryan.
All right. So as we move into transportation here, just try to bear with me a little bit. There are way more questions than answers at this point in time. But I do want to give you guys a little background as we go. So my problem statement was to develop a model for the safe transportation of students considering social distancing and bus capacity. The vast majority of our buses are 77 passenger buses, which when you adhere to social distancing constraints of 6 feet, knocks those down to 13 students per bus. So last year, we transported just under 1,500 students on a daily basis. That's approximately 56 kids per route. Ran almost 300,000 miles. And cost for transportation of the students was just under $670 per student. Okay. The other thing that kind of we have to bear in mind is that we transported almost 800 students that by law we're not required to transport. So we have a couple things that we know that we're going to do, regardless of what decision is made going forward. We know that at the start of the school year, we're going to close the transportation lounge to drivers and paras to try and decrease the transmission between different routes and kids. We had already started to decrease the number of large stops throughout town. Take, for example, Central. Instead of just having one central stop, we're going to have 4 different stops around that area just to kind of eliminate, 200 kids standing in a building waiting to get on a bus. We are going to continue to clean. We've started this already with our summer athletic routes clean after every route or trip, according to the CDC guidelines, using an approved sanitizer. We would not transport any voluntary transfers. So if a kid decides to go to a different school, different elementary school, that they are not a resident of that school, we would not transport them. Then we basically come down to 2 suggestions for transportation. One of the options for us is to only transport students outside of the bypass or outside of the state required 2 and 3 mile exceptions. So as well as mandated IEP students. IEP, special education transportation, wouldn't be affected regardless of what plan we go to. So just so you guys have that. But so for option 1, if we abide by social distancing recommendations of 6 feet of separation, that again limits us to 13 kids on a bus at a time. Couple different ways you could do that. Obviously, if you wanted to increase the number of bus routes, it would take approximately 53 routes to make that happen. That's not feasible at this point in time. We don't have the number of buses or drivers that could even come close to doing it that way. So that would be where we would look at the students that we do transport that we don't have to transport. I do have maps available for you guys if you want to look at them. I don't think now is the time to go into those maps. The other option for us would be to transport similar to normal, not having and knowing that we would not adhere to social distancing guidelines, where we could maintain transportation for the vast majority of our students that have it now. So those are our 2 options. I'm hoping that on July 1st, we get some more guidance from the state to move forward with one of those choices, or if the board has any suggestions, by all means, I would be happy to hear those as we try to move forward. So at this time, I'll take any questions you guys have.
One thing I might mention before questions is, Ryan, we're all waiting. This is one item that the state has said come early July, they're going to give more guidance on.
Correct.
And we're all waiting very anxiously for that guidance on this. So
Some more than others, Mike.
yeah.
Ryan, I do have a question. Let's assume we decided to go with the one of the options that you presented, which is those almost 800 students that we are transporting now, and we can quit doing that. Now, if this is the option, when are you planning to let parents know about that? Is there like any kind of guidelines to when we need to let them know so that they will start planning for transporting their own kids there?
John, that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons. Like, I'm hoping that we get more information sooner than later, because this is a huge impact. This could be a huge impact on some of our families, and probably disproportionately more of our families that have higher needs. So, you know, I don't take that lightly as we look at the option of moving forward with something like that. I know that it would not be a popular decision by any way, shape, or form. I also know that it's going to hurt kids in getting them to school. So if we could get that information by July, as soon as we got that, move forward with that, we would get information out to parents immediately.
Thank you.
Ryan, I just have one. Are there options in between where you can fit more kids on a bus because of like some barrier or whatever it might be? Or if we're going to have people that we don't transport, can we have crossing guards and go back to some of that where kids, like, right. Are there options in between those? Those two. Yeah, those two sound very extreme, right?
Right. Yeah, no, they are very extreme. And we've talked about, crossing guards. My goal was to try and do this without any impact to the budget. Transportation is not, as a pretty large portion of what we do. So I tried to do that without any impact to the budget. So we could add crossing guards at some various spots around town fairly easily. We could, we also look at if family members are riding the bus together, we can stick 2 family members in a seat together instead of 1 kid. So there are things that we can do. The state bus inspector right now is frowning on barriers inside of buses for safety concerns, visibility concerns, things like that. We're experimenting right now with athletics, where we're doing 13 kids to a bus. We have seats marked out. We are sanitizing, and that's the thing that we have to worry about. The other thing that it's going to impact is we have some after school programs that we transport to the Y, Salvation Army, that could also be affected. So as early as we can get information, the better for those programs as well.
Thank you.
And one detail we haven't mentioned yet that's really unclear to us right now is how we can utilize our vans in the fall as well, because that poses even additional issues as far as social distancing and so forth. So we're still looking at that.
Correct.
On transportation.
Hey, Ryan, I would hate to throw one more thing at you, but one of the things I'm concerned with is the management of school or at school when we come in, and if we're going to take temperatures to start the day, and you've already transported even 800 kids or 700 kids, what happens with those kids if they've got that temperature? So is there any way, or have you guys talked about the possibility of being the first contact, actually doing the temperatures before they get onto the bus, so they could, if they're a no, you just whoop, head right back home. Sorry. I just something to think about. I don't.
No, Mike, and that's fine. And I know you don't worry about asking me questions, but that, that is something that we've talked about. That would involve some training for our drivers. It would involve some thermometers. It's nothing that is out of the realm of possibility. Where it gets hard is if we start to have some large stops, then we look at some timing impacts and how long that's going to take to. So there are some logistical things that we would need to look at if that was the case, but it's not undoable.
And transportation will be an issue because, like John pointed out, that as soon as we have some more clarity on it, we will get that information out to the board so you can grapple with the options and see what that clarity is. So we know this is a really pressing issue and one we need to be, stay on the front end on. So anything else on things? Yeah, Karen.
Well, I guess the busing brings that up, of course, one of the bigger issues. And of course, then childcare on the other end for parents, as a whole. And then we talked about the timing, that need to do. I guess I also am questioning as in how much of this as we go along, and this may not be a Ryan question, I'm not quite sure who question, but how much is a requirement that us as a school board need to approve of any changes? Like say we go from, I'll give an example. Say we do online. Well, then do we have to have board approval before we go to hybrid, or from hybrid to go to, the school? How is that supposed to articulate out for us after we've made that initial decision?
Clint, if you want to jump in too, my understanding is that you would not have to approve that. That has to be part of our plan. And if we look at that and determine that it's an option that we need to move to, then we would. So I don't think we have to come back. I think, like, take transportation for example, Karen. What we're really wanting and looking for the board is advice and your thoughts on which direction you would like to go. Again, you have the difference between requirements and recommendations. And what the state currently has right now are recommendations. And what we're seeing is a lot of school districts are choosing not to follow those recommendations, even with summer sports. So you have a lot of school districts that are not following the social distancing recommendation for summer sports. You're going to see more of that probably in the fall as well. So these are not requirements yet that we have. So I think it will be a choice. And does that answer your question, Karen?
Kind of, but Clint, do you have anything further?
I would also add, I think we prepare for those options and get your input on those options, and we make a determination based on how we're going to start. And then as we move forward, it's very much like snow days or other events that come up. Given the current conditions at the time, it might be one building, it might be all buildings, it could be directives from the state. I think we just have to have the flexibility to move and then keep you informed of what we're doing and why. And then, going back to what Mike said, I think that's an important distinction, the recommendations versus requirements. And, there are going to be some things that might be recommendations that we just can't do. But we have to be really transparent with the community and with parents as to this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing and this is why. And I think transportation is a good example of that, right? It's not economically feasible to run buses of 13. It just isn't, right? So as we look at other options, we just have to be clear with parents that this is what we're going to ask, and this is how we're going to handle that. And then they have some options there as well. So those are pieces we'll all have to work through. I don't anticipate the state coming down with a lot of requirements. I would imagine they're going to stay up at a high level. They're going to stay out of it and just say, hey, these are these recommendations and do with what you're going to do. So
great. Thank you.
Because the one thing that Ryan alluded to too is even if we added additional routes, Karen, the trick would be at being able to find bus drivers for those additional routes. And that's a big issue for us right now.
Right. Like right now, Karen, we run 26 bus routes. I would be pushing to get to 30 feet, like in a feasible situation. That would be a push.
Any other questions? Okay, Tom Olsos is up next.
Good evening, everyone. Our subcommittee's problem statement, what we were tasked with were developing a protocol, procedures, and plan for resumption of activity and athletic programs and school trips. So as you look through the information, you probably noticed a lot of similarities in kind of the process and protocol that we put together, especially for activities and athletics. So I'll walk through a few of those right now, key components. And all of these operate off of the basic understanding. One, the governor is kind of given the blessing to participate in these things. So, for example, the spring when the schools were closed during the spring, school sports obviously were not taking place. Governor Reynolds started with a decree that summer sports could take place. So then part two came into place. The Girls Athletic Union and the Boys Athletic Association put together guidelines and approved restarting baseball and softball for the summer. So as we moved forward, as we moved into next school year, obviously schools would have to be open regularly, and then the Athletic Association and Girls Union would have to be blessing the process of and providing guidance for athletics. Our first area, just backing up then a little bit, activity programs. So once we were able to move forward, we'd be consulting school district administrative leadership to confirm the reopening of our facilities, and then utilizing different governing body guidelines when present. So for example, state FFA or music associations, or just the state of Iowa and public health, for example. Considering alternatives to live crowds to limit crowd sizes during performances when possible, example, live streaming. There's also great correlation between our areas and the areas of transportation, and then cleaning and sanitation as well. So item number 5 under activities, if student group size limitations are necessary, creating a method to comply with group size limitations for that activity. For example, if we and when we are able to resume activities this summer, there's probably going to be size guidelines as to how many students you can work with at a time. So we could have limitations that we're working with, or guidelines that we're creating for summer weight training. Other examples, a couple different examples that we're getting into the school year, maybe with our larger classes, we're not able to meet in the size that we normally have in a PE scenario where there's, in a weight training PE class, there may be 60 to 70 students. If the state or our school district, for example, says we're not comfortable with that many students, and we need to create some type of alternative method to that. Or what do we do with band or orchestra or vocal music? Some of the classes that are a lot larger than our regular geometry or English 9 class or whatever it may be. Consulting and utilizing our district transportation guidelines when transportation is involved. Ryan mentioned what we're doing with baseball and softball right now. Hopefully we'll be able to evolve that process as we move forward in order to make transporting fall athletics a reality, or transporting a marching band to a marching band contest if we're able to do that. So, and the last point, coordinating and utilizing appropriate cleaning guidelines for facility usage. So that's a part of what's happening right now with baseball and softball. There's not a lot of that has to be done. If we move into a fall activity or a school activity, there's going to be more of that needed. Athletics, the second area, the same basic beginning points. The Athletic Association, the Girls Union providing guidance. With baseball and softball, working off of that. As a conference, we worked on readjusting our competition schedules because that was necessary since we lost part of the season. Depending on how the fall progresses, that could be a need in the future. If student group size limitations are necessary, create a method to comply with group size limitations. Consider crowd size limitations as necessary. So a current example of that, our baseball and softball process, we're limiting crowd size by only giving so many tickets, game day tickets for each team for the game. We'll consider live streaming broadcast as necessary, and that continues to evolve. Then communication is a key component, communicating guidelines to families and community, following our consult and utilizing our transportation guidelines, and then coordinating and utilizing appropriate cleaning guidelines for facility and transportation usage. That will be definitely a key component as we move into the fall, as we move into back inside into our facilities. Right now for baseball and softball, everything takes place outside, so we don't have to worry about a locker room situation or changing areas or those types of things. The last area was school field trips. So there's two different directions for this, and one area is the area I'll talk just a moment about. If we do take the line, I guess, that we would allow school field trips, because we step or direction one is that we say for a certain amount of time there will be no school field trips because we feel like we need everyone present in the school. But we also need to acknowledge there may be legitimate reasons for that a field trip would be an excellent expansion of the learning opportunities, and it makes sense to allow that group of students to go. So if the school field trip is an option, schools are obviously open and face-to-face instruction is taking place. School field trips need to definitely be tied to the curriculum that's in place or the learning objectives, and then measuring that against the time outside of the regular school day. What is the balance of that? What are the pros and cons of that look like? If the school field trip is approved, transportation guidelines would be followed. If parents are helping to transport the students, parent transportation guidelines must be followed. And then school district cleaning procedures and protocol will be utilized and supported as well. So those are our starting points right now.
Questions for Tom?
Yeah, Tom, I have a question for you on the baseball, softball.
Yes.
It's not so much for baseball because Bruner's an independent field for the high school and no other entity gets to use that. But for softball particularly, there are weekend tournaments down there at Kent Stein, like 7 consecutive weekends, and there's multiple number of kids that use those fields, and particularly Diamond 4 because it is it's the best diamond down there. Do we have anything in regards with the city, an agreement with the city that after those tournaments that dugout area, fencing area, or anything like that is sanitized for our practices in the next day and for our games the next day?
Right now we do not. We are not allowed to use the dugouts per the state's guidelines during practice situations. We can't be in the dugouts.
Okay.
During the games, we can use the dugouts. Basically, there isn't, at the end of a tournament day, from the city's perspective, there's not sanitation or maintenance that's taking place. Whatever they do is taking place the next day or the next working day after that tournament concludes. So it's not something we've been able to do anything with.
Okay. Just the reason I ask is, like I said, there's 7 consecutive weekends where there's tournaments, and they're coming from all over because Illinois has closed their summer programs. So we're getting teams renting our fields at Kent Stein from Illinois to run tournaments. And I think that's a problem that could be, that we could have a problem with that if we don't address that.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, I know you had a bullet about communication to the community. Will you be doing something specific with our booster groups to help them understand what these impacts will look like for each of them?
Can you give me more like a specific example maybe?
Yeah, so I'm thinking from concessions to how, we have booster groups that support a lot of our kids in a variety of ways, even with snacks and meals and, water stations and things that I think we'll probably want to make sure that we have tight control over, that, or we have good communication on what our expectations are in our buildings.
Okay. And those are some of it's easy, maybe easier or it may be more difficult in this area. A lot of what happens with athletics and activities, the guidance will be pretty, once it finally comes out, will kind of give us direction with that. So for example, with the summer, schools are not able to, for baseball and softball, operate school-owned concession stands. Parent groups can't provide water or Gatorade or snacks like they normally would. So once we move past the summer sports, once we get more guidance this summer towards our fall activities, yes, that would definitely be communicated to. If we had guidelines like, okay, normally parent groups give out waters or Gatorades or whatever the case may be, or provide meals, and you can't do that this year, I'd be getting all of that information out to those groups, definitely.
Yeah, perfect. I think there'll probably be a lot of questions around that. So
Yeah, definitely.
Tom, along those lines, I know your budget's kind of a self-sustaining budget and you've lost all kinds of revenues. I'm guessing you've lost all kinds of revenues. And knowing that our booster club, their primary form of revenue or whatever they gain is through concessions, and that basically you get $100,000 kicked back to you. And I don't think that you could survive without that. What other types of things are you guys thinking about to generate revenues in the future? I know you talked about live streaming. Are we thinking about charging people to live stream? Are we thinking about whoever's doing the live streaming to charge them to do it? I know that in the metro, I'm pretty sure Dowling gets a kickback of people to do their games. I don't know. I just don't know what you've explored to how you're going to generate more revenue.
With the live streaming, I've opened the conversation with, if we're not able to have crowds or normal sized crowds for our fall games, that kind of changes the direction of what we need to do from our end in regards to revenue sharing or advertising revenue for a streaming product. In the past, with radio and before and live streaming recently, I think it was almost more of a, the school itself was providing content for those different entities and they did their own thing with their advertising. And there's benefits to that because we get publicity and our fans get to see things or listen to things where they may not get to. So it's kind of a service that we provide. If though that we can't have normal crowd sizes, then we have to look at how we take care of our product a little differently with that and how we negotiate advertising and do those kind of things. So like Discover Muscatine, for example, who does a lot of our live streaming, football, basketball, those types of things, they're aware of that as well. So we have to talk about something like that if necessary. We have been talking a lot internally about like what has been the seasonal program ads and how we go about selling those or trying to expand that or convince our potential sponsors that that's a good use of their money and they should still be supporting us. And here's what they get for doing that. We didn't have, and the Booster Club with the majority of their income coming from the concession stands, hopefully we're able to still do that. They didn't take a huge hit because they don't have, other than the 3 spring track meets, they don't have other concessions and they didn't have softball, baseball concessions in the first place. So the hope is that we can get back to a near normal for them for their future, but it is a scary aspect if we have a big hit in our gate and our other revenue aspects.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next we have up Wendy Donald is up next.
Hey everybody, I'm Wendy Donald and I am the school nurse for the Susan Clark Middle School. My problem statement or our problem statement was develop a process for students who become ill in the school setting. And I worked on this problem statement with several other nurses and we just kind of started a dialogue as to what our health office process should look like. First and foremost, I do want to say that the Muscatine Community School District nurses, we plan to deliver a safe and effective health service for the 2020-2021 school year. And there are so many unanswered questions regarding COVID-19 and in children in particular. And data coming from Johns Hopkins University suggests that, COVID-19 illness seems to be less severe in children. Less than 2% of pediatric patients are hospitalized, and up to 23% of pediatric cases are asymptomatic. So that means they don't present with fever, which makes that very challenging. So one of the biggest questions that's still being asked at this point is what role does a child play in regards to the spread of this illness? Is a child a vector or able to transmit this illness? And most of the data collected up to this point in the nation occurred during the same time that our students were cocooned within their families because school was already canceled. So it's anticipated that as school starts and as Ryan is saying, busing activity starts and sport activity starts, new data is going to emerge on this. And the return of students and staff and putting them together in the school setting, really causes some anxiety on all levels. And all of the things that we've been hearing and reading about, from PPE usage to mass temperature screenings to physical distancing, symptom management, and environmental cleaning, they're all going to need really careful consideration at this point. The management of a student who becomes ill at school is going to look different than past years. It's going to need to be a streamlined process that allows for timely assessment, doable mitigation strategies, and referral for needed treatment. I'm thinking a flowchart format may be helpful for all people involved in healthcare services, including those unlicensed administrative personnel that help us from time to time. The school health office is going to need to accommodate student visits as well as potentially infectious students, preferably in different sections of the health office to reduce that communicability. Surface contamination, although it's not the main transmission for COVID-19, we are going to have to look at that in the health office where students gather when they are not feeling well, and it needs to be reasonably disinfected. PPE needs also need to be available for the nurse to use when appropriate, and especially for the nurse herself. The National Association of School Nurses and the American Academy of Pediatrics, they both recognize a fever at 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And the Muscatine school nurses, we've traditionally notified parents when their student has a temp of 100 or greater with associated symptoms, such as headache or cough or sore throat. We know sometimes when a child is anxious or very upset, their temp can elevate, but there's no other associated symptom. So once we get the student calmed down, that temp will decrease. However, students that are deemed ill, they will need to return home in a timely manner and remain out of school until fever-free for 72 hours without the use of fever-reducing medication. And I'm all up for educating parents on what exactly that terminology means, whether that's in written or some sort of video or just person-to-person communication. And as you guys know, 72 hours is an increase of time. Traditionally, we've always said 24. And moving forward in certain situations, 24 hours may be appropriate. And I would say that's going to depend on communication between parent, healthcare provider, and school nurse. I want to touch on a little bit on communication because here on out, I think this is really a key point. Communication between parent and school nurse will be crucial at all stages of illness at this point. From leaving school ill to being home during illness and then return to school. We kind of need to keep tabs on what's going on to make sure that timeline for COVID-19 is being observed if it is a positive COVID-19 or potential positive. There also needs to be a communication plan for students who bypass the health office completely and just go home from school ill per parent communication. I don't exactly know what reentry will look like for that, but we probably want to keep tabs on that as well. Communication between school nurse and local public health office is also vital at this point. We need to understand the risk level for COVID-19 in our community and then plan our accommodations according to that. In other words, maybe the health management plan that we start out with at the beginning of the year will not be what we end up with at Christmas time or even at spring break time or towards the end of the year. Communication is the key. We do need to stay on top of positive COVID cases, especially between custodial staff, transportation staff, administration. And Jill Berquin and I, we kind of talked about that with even staff illness, that we really do need to keep on top of that to make sure everybody's protected. Physical distancing within the health office is of particular concern, and creative ways to deliver care for those well-child health visits needs to be embraced. It's anticipated that the school health office will be busier this year due to our heightened concern for illness and more involved follow-up. A school nurse in every building would really be optimal. Thank you.
Questions for Wendy?
Wendy, I do have a question. This is John. I know we are concentrating on COVID-19 right now, but what will be your vision and expectation to putting COVID-19 and a flu season together?
Oh, exactly.
So can you shed some information, please?
So right now, COVID-19, the symptomology for that is really vague. I mean, especially in terms of children, there's even some abdominal symptoms that can be associated. It used to be the hallmark was the shortness of breath, the fever, and the cough. And they've dropped the fever at this point because, like I said, up to 23% of pediatric, but even in the adult status, that fever is not as high of a symptom anymore. But going along with flu, we are rolling into the school year where there's going to be our influenza concern, which have a lot of the same symptomology, the cough, the fever, the sudden onset of not feeling well, body aches. So this timing is crucial for both. And I see an overlap that we're going to see sick kids, and it may be influenza or it may be COVID-19. We don't know where testing is at this point. Up until now, I don't know if students, if kids would be tested or if their physician would just do a verbal, you have the symptomology of this, we're going to diagnose you with this and stay home until feeling better. So definitely, I think some of the health office strategies that we'll put in place for COVID are going to benefit us by keeping tabs on influenza season as well.
John, the one interesting thing to me has been the region colleges. They're looking at that. I was interested in their recommendations. They're ending their semester at UNI and Iowa State at Thanksgiving, partly because of what Wendy's talking about. And Iowa State's going to an online component after Thanksgiving. And I think they're trying to be proactive in kind of the realm you're talking about, John.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Yep. Karen.
Wendy, a big thing to me is I'm a data type of person.
Okay.
And the thing of it is that are we going to ourselves, whether or not the state is a requirement or anything for us to do, how are we going to take and keep track of this? Are we going to have some kind of a model ourselves to do that?
So you're asking how we're going to keep track of like student visits, or how we're going to keep track of student illness?
So yeah, actually both. And also if for some reason, needless to say, I know there would be some kind of a policy if somebody comes down with the COVID-19, so that would take, so that are we required then to, of course, tell the state that we have that? Because I know there's been some question in the past as in who is even required to tell the state if they have, the COVID-19 in their businesses and different things.
Well, COVID-19 is a reportable condition, a state reportable condition. So if there's a positive test, so that's a key point here. There's several ways you can be diagnosed with COVID. You could have symptoms, you could call your doctor, and your doctor could say, yes, Karen, by what you're telling me, you have COVID, go home, self-isolate, we'll see you. And there's never a positive test on your chart. There's others that would go in and would have the test. When the test is positive, that is a public health reportable condition. And so public health then would intervene with close contact identification and working with the family in terms of, getting them on their timeline, identifying close contacts, when can you return? And so in that case, if there was a high suspect of COVID-19 within the school, there is public health law that would allow that communication between public health and the school going back and forth. If it's just a verbal, go home, you don't look good, we're not going to test you, we think that's what it is, then that becomes a little bit more murky, because then that would be you contacting your employer saying, hey, I can't come in today because I have COVID, and that would also need a process on how we're going to handle that, how we're going to respond to that. And in terms of the health office visits, there is data that is kept at the schools to know like who visited the office or how busy that office is. So if you needed to know what is the, how many kids are being seen at Jefferson on this day, we would have a pretty good idea of what that is. Last year prior to spring break, the middle schools piloted an online health office appointment process. So the student actually on their computer, on their school issued computer, completed a Google form to say, hey, I need to see the nurse, answered certain questions, and then I was able to see that and call them down and assess them. So if we have to maintain social distancing in the school setting, I would highly suggest middle school and high school to try maybe an online appointment process. The backside of that then is that there is a spreadsheet that's created that's time-stamped to let you know who showed, what the answers to their questions were, and you know, when they were frequenting the office. So that would help keep that data as well.
That's good. Thank you. That's good to know.
Any other questions for Wendy? If not, Lisa Bunn is going to close out our operations recommendations.
Yay, I'm the closer.
Yes, you are.
All right. So first off, I want to start by thanking the communications subcommittee members, as well as the Muscatine Multi-Sector Marketing Group, as they reviewed our communication plan and offered their input and suggestions. I wanted to also let you guys know that I was one of several members of the Iowa Schools Public Relations Association cohort that worked on developing a statewide communications template for school districts to use when they're developing their own communications plan. And both groups' work was actually really invaluable in the development of our own plan. And I'm happy to say that because of this collaboration, our plan has met and exceeded the state of Iowa's return to learn communication requirements. So our plan is pretty, I feel like our plan is pretty comprehensive. One of its goals is that it reaches out accessible to all stakeholders, parents, students, community at large, and our local businesses. Examples of some of the communication outreach include providing commercials via MPWs, cable network, our social media accounts. We are looking into providing roundtable discussions through MCC, Discover Muscatine, Hy-Vee's Tony Tone Today show, and then of course presenting those on our YouTube channel and Facebook. The communication plan also states that district admin and the Return to Learn chairs will meet with various stakeholder groups to share out the Return to Learn plan. But of course, we do not know what or how that will look like, as it depends on our COVID meeting restrictions. It could be in a large auditorium such as Central or the Muskie Room at the Admin Center, or maybe even again virtually. But we all thought it was important that the various groups from staff, students, PTO, businesses, building leadership teams, etc., are able to hear the plan and ask questions. Then once the definitive plans are in place for what the start of school will look like, of course, we'll utilize all avenues of communication available to provide the information to all of our stakeholders. And one example, which actually was offered by a parent in the subcommittee group work, was that we should have our teachers reach out to our students, especially our littlest muskies, because they are who our students trust and can relate to. So it is our hope that hearing what protocols we put in place from those adults that our students trust will help our kiddos as they begin to process returning to school this fall. So that's just one idea that came out of that subgroup, which I thought was really invaluable and important for us to consider. Then, of course, after the year begins, we will reach out to our stakeholders via surveys. Our poor parents are going to be surveyed a lot, and staff, to find out how each group is doing, what their needs are, and how we can improve our plan as we continue to move through the year. So Director Morgan, that would be where we would assess any social emotional needs that they need in order to be successful. I also want to stress that this plan will be considered a working document, as is all the rest of the Return to Learn plan, because we'll need to make adjustments as we go throughout the school year, I'm sure. One of our main goals is to be as transparent as possible, as well as providing our stakeholders with the rationale and understanding of the processes and protocols being put in place as we open our doors to our students this fall. Our parents and staff in the community can always refer to the Return to Learn Plan Google site for the most updated information. An FAQ is being developed and will be added to the site in July, and will be updated throughout the year as questions come in and as processes and protocols are determined. So that is the, I don't know, 5-6 page document in 5 paragraphs. So if you have any questions, I would entertain them. Wow.
Yeah, good job, Lisa.
Guys, all right. So, but I'm always open for suggestions too. Shoot them my way. If you can think of something that we missed, I would love to see them.
I guess what I would say, Lisa, is do you have any help when it comes to working on this communication area? Because I know at one time we talked about that it's an enormous category considering everything else that you do, and if there's anything that is thought of as in how to be able to help out with some of that expertise.
Well, I mean, a lot of it, some of it will become pushed out by the district, which is your office, my office. Communities will be pushing out their own communications to their parents and students. So, I mean, it's going to be a team effort. I have a couple of people in the admin center that, you know, are I utilize quite a bit too. So, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, and we work together great as a team, and we're here for the kids and our staff, and we'll do what needs to be done.
Any other questions? If not, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Well, I first want to thank you for hanging in there with us tonight. We did recognize from the beginning that we knew it was going to be a lengthy meeting, but we do think the information presented is so valuable, and the depth of the discussion is important. We really appreciate your feedback, and thank you to everyone who submitted their questions ahead of time. That really helped, I think, each of our presenters tonight formulate kind of what they were going to say and make sure that they were able to address some concerns. We recognize that there are still a lot of unanswered questions regarding the reopening. However, I want to express again how committed our committee members are to collaborating with our staff and stakeholders throughout July and August to ensure that we do have a solid start to the 2020-2021 school year. The way that we're going to continue to keep board members and community members informed is through that Return to Learn Google site. And then we will additionally be back in July to present any updates or what we've learned as guidance is released. So we will make sure that we update the board in July. Our committees will be working through action steps, as mentioned, through July and August. And then we encourage any community members that are watching or still watching to visit that Return to Learn Google site, because that'll be kind of where our hub for all of this new information. So again, thank you, and we recognize your commitment to help serve our students at an extremely high level and in a safe way. And we just want to thank our committee members and subcommittee members for all of their work.
Stephanie and Mike and Stacy and team, thank you so much for all of the content you have shared. I can't imagine the hours that have gone into the planning of what you have done. And again, you're all working so hard to get a plan that we need. We still are waiting for more information around. So I anxiously await July 1 with each of you to hear what our additional guidance is and to see what changes we need to make. And like we've all seen happen in the last 3+ months, a day makes a big difference. So whether it's a day, whether it's a week, we do ask that our community be flexible with us. We will do the very best we can for our students. as we journey through a pandemic together. So again, a long
Tammy?
meeting. Yes.
And this is Toby. I feel like I have to say this on behalf of the incredible work that everybody's done. I'm humbled to be on the board at this time in history when the teachers, the administrators have done such Herculean work. But I think I need to put on the record that I'm extremely disappointed in the state and their leadership and expecting us to jump through hoops and put together plans without any real guidance. And I know it's not us. It's not only us. There are other districts in the state as well. But I think publicly that needs to be said because you all are just working your tails off. And it's still so up in the air, and that's disappointing. And the state it's just disappointing in that leadership. That's the way I feel, and I just want you guys to know it.
Thanks, Toby. I see lots of heads nodding on the screen, or maybe they're not fiercely nodding, but I see gentle nods happening. So I think your comments are absolutely appreciated. This is, I think, some of the biggest, arduous, hardest work that I've been involved in my board time, and I suspect the biggest project most of us will probably do in our careers. So I'm anxious to get to the other side and look back and talk about, hey, remember when we can tackle whatever's coming up, because remember when we all managed through a pandemic. So I will walk us through just a couple of last things, and then you all have other things you want to do with what's left of your night. So here's some reminders that we have coming up. June 23rd, which is tomorrow, the Riverbend Mobile Food Bank will be at the Administration Center. That's 2900 Mulberry. At 4:30 p.m., they will have a grab and go model that will be utilized. It's what we've done the last several months. No one's going into the building, but the mobile food pantry will be there to serve. And we're grateful for so many in our community that have been both volunteer to make the event happen, and those that are the donations that come in so that food is available. July 2nd will be our class of 2020 graduation ceremony. Probably what my second favorite day of the year next to the holidays with my own family, but I'm so looking forward to graduation. So everyone put in your requests for good weather. We will be outdoors, and communication has been sent about that. And then that takes us to July 13th, which is our next regularly scheduled board meeting. I can tell you it's at 7 p.m. I can't tell you yet where we'll be at, but we will communicate that. So whether we'll be in person or whether we'll be virtually, we will share that later. Jerry, we bid you adieu, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything. And Clint, look out, because it's full on, my friend. It's you all are working in just very unusual times. Does anyone else have anything for the good of the cause before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
Just want to thank you, Jerry, for your service to Muscatine Community Schools, and I wish you goodwill.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great experience. Like I said, no regrets. We are glad that we had a chance to be Muskies.
I too, Jerry, need to be able to say it, and I actually said this to you before. I got on the school board. Part of it was so that I could work with Jerry. And so then what do? You decide to retire on us. But I thank you for the time that I have been able to share with you. And I just hope you be able to stay in contact with us to let us know what's going on in your life. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. You bet.
Well, I think what I would like to say also, let's not forget that Jerry was also a well-known community member, and all of us dealt with him, not just as a board member and a superintendent, but we dealt with him in many other organizations. So thank you, Jerry, for your service. We wish you the best, you and Jody, and we are hoping that we hear back from you and we hear your good news.
You will.
Yes, Jerry, thank you. I always look at it's something better than, when you leave it than when you started it. And I think the school district and the community are better for you being here. than I would have been without you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, friends, I see some teary eyes coming. So I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
I make the motion to adjourn.
I will second that.
Beautiful. Y'all usually leave me hanging on this. Thank you. All those in favor of a motion to adjourn for the evening, please signify by saying aye.
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 Unopposed?
Nay,
And the
Toby.
motion carries. Thanks, Toby. I can always count on you for that. Thank
Yes.
you for a hard night, a long meeting, a ton of work. Thank you to all the staff. You are so appreciated. I look forward to what's next. We'll see everybody soon.
All right.
Jerry, good luck.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
And hello, Clint.
Yeah, and hello.
See you
Clint.
soon. I'll see you all soon.
Yep.